This is an Alt-Shift-X live stream. Welcome. Let's talk about House of the Dragon Season 2, Episode 3. We will not give any spoilers for future episodes, but we'll talk about what's happening in the books, what's happening in past episodes, the character arcs, the plots, the secrets, the mysteries, the ambiguities, and it'll be fun. So thanks for joining me. So what are the biggest things that happened this episode? We got our first battle of the series. I mean, we did have battles in the Stepstones against the Triarchy, but this is our first battle in Westeros. So the conflict between the Blacks and the Greens has become a war. The name of this war in the books is the Dance of the Dragons. Daemon, this episode, goes to Harrenhal, the spookiest castle in Westeros, and the biggest, and he has some crazy visions. And he meets this mysterious woman, Alice Rivers, and all of that is very exciting. We also see Baela flying her dragon Moondancer, chasing after Kristen Cole and Gwen Hightower. We meet Ulf, the alleged bastard of Balon the Brave Targaryen, a dragon seed. We see Rhaenyra sneaking into King's Landing to visit Alicent in a desperate attempt to prevent this war. And most importantly, we see Aemond Targaryen hang Dong. So, real mix of excitement and emotional devastation this episode. So in this live stream, we will talk all about it. I will answer some of your questions, and we'll have a good time. No spoilers for future episodes here. We're doing these live streams every week at about 10 p.m. Eastern Time, right after each episode airs. So the title of this episode is The Burning Mill. And that's a reference to this mill here that we see in the Riverlands that was burned during this battle between House Blackwood and House Bracken. But I think that the burning mill has a deeper symbolism as well, because a lot of conversations in this episode were talking about cycles of violence. The idea that people do something bad, someone else gets revenge, then someone strikes back with their own revenge, and it's just this dominoes of atrocity after atrocity. Simon Strong says that sin begets sin begets sin, and Rainey says that soon no one even remembers the original reason why the conflict began. People are just caught in this repetition, this cycle of violence. And so that's true of the Blackwoods and the Brackens, because these families have hated each other for thousands of years, and literally no one remembers what exactly started their feud, but they're stuck in this cycle of revenge and counter-revenge. And the danger is that the Blacks and the Greens, Aegon's side and Rhaenyra's side, are entering the same thing, where they're just fighting each other for, Aemon's eye was cut up by Luke, so Aemond killed Luke, so then Daemon had Jaehaerys killed, and there's just these dominoes of violence. And so when Alicent and Rhaenyra speak at the end of the episode, and they're trying to prevent this war, Alicent's saying, well, it doesn't even really matter anymore what Viserys wanted. It does, like, they're arguing over whether or not Viserys changed his mind about whether Aegon or Rhaenyra should be heir. And part of what Alicent is saying is that, well, it kind of doesn't matter now because we're at war and we're striking at each other for the murder of our children. The original reason no longer matters. And so I think that idea of the cycle of violence is represented by that burning mill. Because it's a windmill. It's a turning windmill. I love the visuals that this windmill, it is still turning. See it turning in the top right there. It's a turning cycle of violence. It's burning. It's a circle. It's the circle of violence. And we see that same circular imagery, and maybe I'm reaching here, but we see circular imagery in this table, this altar at the sept. Look at this really distinct circle at the center of the sept where Rhaenyra and Alicent are talking. That arguably could represent that cycle of violence, and also this table in Harrenhal where Daemon and Simon talk about sin begets sin begets sin. It's this really distinct circular table. So I feel like cycles and circles are part of the symbolism here. Or maybe I'm overanalyzing it. Anyway, so we're going to talk about this episode basically scene for scene. Thanks for the super chat from Sam Ringwald, who points out that there has been a change made to the opening sequence. So yeah, I was disappointed last episode that the opening sequence had not changed, because the opening sequence is this tapestry that shows historical events going all the way back from ancient Valyria to the present day in Hot D. And it looks like now they are adding events from the series to the tapestry, showing us that the characters' choices are writing history, and history is written in blood. So this image here in the opening sequence, that's Jaehaerys. That's Aegon and Helena's son, Jaehaerys, who was murdered in the previous episode, and this is him in his funeral procession. And so, we saw how the Greens used Jaehaerys' death as propaganda, blaming Rhaenyra when it was actually Daemon. And so now that event has entered the history books. This is something that is remembered. And the other event that gets added to the tapestry is these rat catchers, because last episode Aegon had 100 rat catchers hanged because he knew that one of the rat catchers murdered his son Jaehaerys. So I like how, history is remembering both the murder of the prince and also the murder of these common people. And that was one of Otto's concerns last episode, is that people are mad that their fathers, brothers, and sons, these innocent rat catchers, were murdered, and that makes Aegon look like a monster who people don't want to support. And so the blood drips down from these murdered men, and the blood continues and runs along the blank tapestry towards the throne. So we see how blood is staining the very fabric of the history of this dynasty, which is all very wonderful, evocative symbolism. So I wonder what other bloody events will be added to the tapestry as we go on. So let's have a look at the opening scene, which was the Blackwoods and the Brackens. So we've heard about the Blackwoods and Brackens a few times in this series. Back in season 1, episode 4-ish, we saw Rhaenyra going on her Tinder tour. She was going around finding some hot, eligible singles to marry. And, she found Beric Dondarrion of the Deep Dry Moat. And she also met a Blackwood and a Bracken. And the Blackwood kid killed the Bracken at Storm's End right in front of her because they were insulting each other. Because the Brackwoods and the Blackens, the Brackens and the Blackwoods have this ancient feud, and everyone disagrees about what started it. The Blackwoods say that the Brackens poisoned their weirwood tree because the Blackwoods worship the old gods, like the Starks do. The Blackwoods are one of the few families in the Riverlands in the south who still worship the old gods with the trees with the red leaves, whereas the Brackens worship the Faith of the Seven. So this feud between the Brackens and the Blackwoods is partly a religious feud, among other things. But the Brackens claim that the Blackwoods stole their land in the past, including some hills that are named after someone's breasts. It's either Missy's teats or Barbara's teats, depending on who you ask. In fact, maybe that hill there is meant to... Yeah, that probably is Barbara's teats right there, actually, because there are these hills that are shaped like a woman's breasts, and so they are named after either a Blackwood woman or a Bracken woman, depending on who you ask. Maybe that is one of those hills there. And so that's one of the many things that the Brackens and the Blackwoods have been fighting over. And they basically take any excuse to start fighting again. And this war between Aegon and Rhaenyra is as good a reason as any to start attacking each other once again. So the Blackwoods have declared to support Rhaenyra, while the Brackens have agreed to support Aegon, and so now they're fighting each other. And so we're introduced to this character, this young, newly made knight, Aeron Bracken. Apparently he's just become a knight and he's got a sword and he's all excited about it. And apparently he's the nephew of the Lord of House Bracken, I believe. And so he's confronted by these Blackwoods and they're arguing over land. Apparently someone's moved the standing stones and tried to claim more land for House Bracken. And this is something that we saw discussed at the Small Council in Season 1, when Rhaenyra and Alicent were bickering about this. and they were saying that, oh, well, this should be resolved by Lord Tully, because Lord Grover Tully rules over the Riverlands. The Blackwoods and the Brackens are both sworn to obey Lord Grover Tully, but Lord Grover Tully, as we learned this episode, is feeble, can barely speak, nor is he able to seal his bowels. So the Blackwoods and the Brackens aren't listening to him, and so they're getting back to their old fight. So we've seen how this particular land dispute has bubbled along for years and years, and because of the failure of Lord Grover Tully and of the government in the Red Keep, they've failed to resolve this, and now it's breaking out into war. I really like how we see the sort of vulnerability and the uncertainty of these young men. This guy, Aaron Bracken, like we see, he sort of hesitates when they start throwing insults at each other, and he hesitates, and then he decides, yeah, no, we're doing this. We're going to pull out the sword. We're going to escalate this into violence. And it's sort of tragic, because they're so young, and they're not all, like, there's some doubt and vulnerability on his face, but it's his face who we see dead first. And so there's just tragedy to that. It reminds me of what Rhaenys said in Season 1, Episode 1, when she was saying that the realm has been at peace for so long under King Jaehaerys and then under King Viserys. There's a whole generation who have never experienced war. And these young men are keen to prove themselves, because in this society, that is how young men get social advancement, is by fighting in tournaments, in wars, becoming knights, becoming lords. That's one of the main ways you do that. So they have been taught by their society to fight, and so that's what they're doing, and everyone's learning how destructive that can be. We see the Bracken says that Rhaenyra is a babe killer and a kinslayer, because the propaganda that the Greens have spread about Rhaenyra allegedly killing Jaehaerys, Aegon's son, has spread, and it is an atrocity to kill your own little nephew. So that, like, narrative, that propaganda becomes part of this conflict. And so they argue over who the rightful king is, and then he pulls his sword, and then the battle happens. So in the books, we get more detail about this battle. Ali Blackwood is one of the participants in this. Here's some artwork by Ertech Altanos in the official book, Rise of the Dragon. So there was this whole messy battle, and some of the details are that the Blackwoods attacked the Brackens, according to the book. They burned crops, they destroyed septs, they destroyed the churches of the Faith of the Seven because of that religious difference. And then the Blackwoods ambushed the Brackens by this mill. And Amos Bracken killed Lord Samwell Blackwood in battle, but then Amos was killed, apparently by Samwell's teenage sister, Black Alysanne, Black Ally, with a weirwood arrow. So Black Ally is a pretty cool character who hopefully we will meet later. We may see more of the Blackwoods and Brackens. But this is the first battle in the war. And it's not the first time the Blackwoods and Brackens have fought, and it's not the last time the Blackwoods and Brackens will fight. In the time of Game of Thrones, in the Game of Thrones books, the Blackwoods and Brackens fight again, in the same way that the Blackwoods and Brackens are using this current conflict as an excuse to fight. The same thing happens in Game of Thrones when they start attacking each other again, and the Brackens switch sides like 3 times. Normally, in the books, the Brackens are more sort of like villainous, and the Blackwoods are more sort of coded as good guys. But in this case, they seem sort of equally dickish, I would say, in Hot Tea so far. So yeah, it'll be cool to see what continues. And we hear Daemon plans to resolve the Blackwood-Bracken conflict, and also Kristen plans to resolve this. So, you know, Kristen and the Greens are going to want to support the Brackens, while Daemon's going to want to support the Blackwoods, and that'll be one more ongoing war in this conflict. So thanks for the donation from Jess K, who says the fact that it's 2 kids who keep starting the war is distressing. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely that generational age thing, isn't it? Where it's always the kids who want to escalate the war, but only because they've been taught to by the older generation, right? Like, it reminds me of that scene when Aegon and Jace are in the training yard, And Kristen Cole and Harwin are pushing the kids against each other. This is what they were trained to do. I mean, Aaron Bracken just came from his training as a knight, presumably, right? And all they've been doing is teaching him how to use that sword. So, of course, he pulls out the sword. They're just doing what they've been taught to do by their parents. And so the cycle of violence is fed by this generational dynamic where the adults pass down their violence and their grievances and their trauma and then put swords in their kids' hands. So, yeah, the Battle of the Burning Mill happens, and it sucks. And it's a really, like, visceral horror here. I mean, the thousands and thousands of bodies. Like, we don't see the battle. It's just a hard cut to the aftermath of the battle. I suppose they didn't want to, waste, spending a whole lot of the show's budget on a battle that has no major characters in it. I think it makes sense to not show the battle, but they do show us the horror and the destruction of the battle. So in all the later conversations, when Rhaenyra is trying to convince Alicent to help her end the war and prevent the war, this is what we're talking about. This is what we're trying to prevent, is the deaths of thousands. This is the horror. This is the stakes. So showing us the stakes visually makes a lot of sense, I think. So then we cut to Dragonstone. So in the last episode, the Green's Kingsguard Arik came to try and kill Rhaenyra, and he was stopped by his twin brother Eric. And so that was this whole heart-wrenching, tragic thing last episode, where these twin brothers who loved each other were forced to kill each other by the circumstances of this war. And so it's quite beautiful that they are buried in the same grave together. They shared a womb, now they share a grave. That sort of interconnectedness of life and death is something that they've been playing with all throughout the series. So quite beautiful that they're together in the end. Though Jace is not happy about it. Jace says that Arik sullies the grave of his brother Eric, and Arik is a villain. So, Jace sees this in sort of morally straightforward terms, but Rhaenyra has a more open-minded perspective of saying that, well, Arik was just trying to do the right thing. Throughout this episode, I think it's interesting that Jace is pretty eager to fight. Jace is pretty keen, like Aegon, like Aemond, to go out and prove himself and to win this war for his family. And we see Jace being frustrated with Rhaenyra's continual delays and Rhaenyra's refusal to jump into war. So I wonder, how long will Jace remain patient? How long will Jace remain obedient? Will he stay loyal to his mother, or will he go and strike out and join the war? I also like that, we see a burial. We've seen a lot of funerals and, death rituals in this series. We saw that the Velaryons inter their dead in the sea when Laena Velaryon was put in, that coffin and was put into the sea, which is apparently, an ancient Velaryon tradition because they are connected to the sea and to ships. While we've seen that Targaryens get cremated. We saw Emma and Balon get cremated because Targaryens are connected to fire. Whereas Eric and Arik, they're just regular Westerosi people, and so they don't get cremated or buried at sea, they just get buried in the earth. And so it sort of reminds us that there are different religious and cultural practices among these different cultures, and that the Targaryens and Velaryons consider themselves, something special, whereas the Westerosi are something more normal, something lesser. So that's nice to see. And so then Rhaenys comes along, and Rhaenys has this role of being an older mentor. Rhaenys is from the older generation. She's lived through more history than most of the other characters, and so she gives some wisdom to Rhaenyra. She says that Otto wouldn't have sent Arik to kill Rhaenyra because that's such a wild thing to do. Which, in fairness, Otto did want Rhaenyra killed last season. Otto did send the Kingsguard Harald to go and get Rhaenyra so that he could kill Rhaenyra last season. So, it's not all that wild to think that Otto might have ordered this. But Rhaenys is correct that this was ordered by Kristen and Aegon, not by Otto. And so Rhaenys talks about what we were talking about with cycles of violence, and people always forget the original cause of conflict when it just becomes a cycle of revenge and revenge. And Rhaenyra, she's angry. She kind of blames Alicent, but Rhaenys reminds her that the murder of Jaehaerys happened, and Rhaenyra was blamed for the murder of Jaehaerys, even though it wasn't Rhaenyra is doing. It was Daemon's. So in the same way, Rhaenyra should not assume that Alicent is responsible for Arik trying to kill her. It may have been someone else's fault. And so Rhaenys tells Rhaenyra that, like, hey, you need to talk to Alicent and try and stop this. And Rhaenyra reacts with anger. Rhaenyra is angry at Alicent because last season Alicent was saying, yeah, Rhaenyra, you'll be a great queen, I support you. But then it seems as though Alicent was lying and betrayed Rhaenyra and crowned Aegon instead at the last moment. And so throughout this episode, we see Rhaenyra gradually being convinced to, like, okay, I should try to reconnect with my old friend. I should try to prevent this war. I still feel angry at Alicent, but I have a duty, a responsibility to avert war if I can. So Rhaenyra, to her credit, is really, really trying to do the right thing here. Although, as Alicent says, it's too little too late, and Alicent is now powerless, and the war has begun. By the time Rhaenyra talks to Alicent, the Green's armies are already marching. So, yeah, tragedy all the way down. Thanks for the super chat from Blastwave, who says that in the Game of Thrones books, Stannis Baratheon calls Rhaenyra a usurper. Yeah, it's funny because there's a lot of parallels between Stannis and Rhaenyra. They're both brooding on Dragonstone, having been usurped by someone else for their rightful throne. I think the reason why Stannis considers Rhaenyra a usurper is because she's the female, and Stannis goes with the conventional precedent that only men may rule. But, you know, it's that whole thing of the uncertainty of succession. Like, does Viserys have the right to name Rhaenyra his heir and go against a century of precedent saying that only males may rule? It might benefit Stannis to be more open-minded there. So yeah, Rhaenyra gradually gets convinced that it would be a good idea to talk to Alicent and try and avert this war. So then we cut to King's Landing, the Red Keep. Criston Cole is now the Hand of the King. He's basically the Prime Minister of Westeros. We see that he's got this neat chain, this necklace made of golden hands, and that's a symbol of him being the Hand of the King. We actually saw Tyrion wear the same kind of necklace in Game of Thrones, Season 2. Tyrion wore this same kind of chain. In the books, there's a little poem about this. Hands of gold are always cold, but a woman's touch is warm. And then in the book, Tyrion uses that same chain, that same necklace, to strangle Shay to death. So there's a whole sort of history to that necklace. Although for some reason in the Game of Thrones show, they used a different chain, not the one that's made out of hands. So I don't know. I feel like they kind of botched that in the Game of Thrones show. But anyway, Criston has that same kind of necklace of hands. And I guess there's a sort of layer of irony to that, given that, you know, the Kingsguard are meant to be chaste. They are not meant to be touched sexually, and yet Criston is breaking his oath and having sex with Alicent. And there's some of that sexual tension between them when Alicent farewells Criston later on. I don't know, a little bit of irony there. But yeah, Criston is doing his patented, like, 5,000-mile stare, just standing alone like a robot staring at the wall. He is overwhelmed by stress. I mean, he did not ask to be made Hand of the King. When Aegon made him Hand of the King last episode, it seemed as though Criston was totally surprised, totally blindsided. He was not informed that he was about to become the Prime Minister, but now he's the Prime Minister, a position that he is even less qualified for than Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. This guy has been failing upwards so hard, and he's rightly insecure about that. I mean, they talk about imposter syndrome, right? But if you're actually an imposter, I guess it's just being an imposter, innit? So yeah, Criston is stressed, and it's scary. It is scary to see this guy in charge, because we know what he's capable of. We saw him murder Lyman Beesbury. We saw him murder Joffrey Lonmouth. He has no experience with government and politics, and yet he's the Hand. So let's see how this works out. We saw Criston ride off to battle with Gwaine Hightower and a Hightower army in this episode, which, you know, might be a good thing for the government. It might be good for the government if Criston is far away. But that does raise the question of, like, well, who's in charge now? Because, Kristen goes to the Green Council and they try to do the business of government, but they instantly start bickering with each other. Jasper Wilde throws shade at Kristen for his Arik plan not working, and Alicent throws shade at Kristen and he bites back, and they all immediately start bickering. And it's like, oh, hang on. Otto Hightower was the one person who everyone listened to. Like, Otto was a dick, but he at least had some authority and leadership and held this council together. Without Otto, it's not really clear who's in charge. There's this wonderful moment where, like, someone in the council says, oh, so what do we do next? And everyone kind of looks to Kristen, and Kristen doesn't say anything because he doesn't know what to do. And it just becomes, like, Otto Hightower's absence here is felt very heavily. And now Kristen leaves as well. So who's going to run the government now that Otto and Kristen have left King's Landing? No one seems particularly willing to listen to Alicent. She is the Queen Dowager, so you'd think she would have some authority. And she hopes to influence Aegon and Aemond, but Aegon and Aemond seem increasingly to want to do their own thing. So it's really not clear who's steering this ship, and if they're going to try and avoid war, they're going to need some kind of leader to do that. So it's very difficult. So they have a discussion, and basically they're bickering, but the idea is that they're going to go to war. Aegon is keen for war. He glibly says, "To war, then," not caring about the consequences of it. I do wonder if Aegon had seen that shot that we saw of thousands of dead bodies in the Riverlands after the Battle of the Burning Mill, if he saw that horror, surely he would not so glibly and so happily declare war, Like, these kids have never seen a battlefield. They don't know what they're signing up to. And yet, they're so keen to prove themselves that they argue over who gets to join Kristen's army. Kristen has a plan. Kristen's plan is that he wants to go into the Crown Lands, and he wants to gather up a bunch of the rebel houses. So houses like Darkland and Staunton, Bar Emmon, Massey, and Celtigar, they support Rhaenyra and the Blacks. And so what Kristen wants to do is grab a bunch of men and take over those houses and force those rebel houses to join him. And then after he rallies up the Crown Lands, he wants to march up to Harrenhal, take the biggest castle in Westeros, and then use that to take over the Riverlands and, like, force the Blackwoods to join them, and then they'll have all the Crown Lands and all the Riverlands, and then hopefully they can win the war. It is a pretty ambitious plan, not gonna lie. Pretty ambitious campaign that Kristen wants to wage. So we'll see how that works out. But as, Aegon and Aemond are saying, it might help if you use dragons. Dragons are the biggest weapons of war in this world. We've learned historically that dragons are pretty good at roasting armies. There was this little thing called the Field of Fire when dragons roasted like 50,000 men of the Reach and the Westerlands. So if Kristen's trying to rally soldiers and march armies around, dragons could be a problem for him. And we see that when Baelor swoops down on Kristen with her dragon. So that's part of the argument of this episode, is that everyone's saying, hey, let's get the dragons involved. But the problem with the dragons is that they need to be steered by a dragon rider. And most of the dragon riders are children, and no one wants to risk their children. We don't really trust a child at the wheel of a flying nuke, as we learned last season when when Vhagar disobeyed Aemond and killed Luke. So tis fraught, as Mazaria says this episode. And yeah, Orwyle is saying, hey, like, Lord Grover Tully should get the Brackens and the Blackwoods in order. And then Jasper Wilde says, Lord Grover Tully is a flaccid old fool, and he couldn't control his penis in an orifice. He says something a bit more colourful than that. And it is kind of funny that Jasper is talking about dicks, because Jasper's nickname is Iron Rod. And some say that his nickname Iron Rod is because of the sternness of his justice, but others say that he's called Iron Rod because of the, quote, stiffness of his member. Jasper fathered many children on, 4 different wives. His wives died of exhaustion, reportedly. He famously has an iron rod. So yeah, lots of pointless bickering. There's an army marching towards King's Landing from the Reach and also from the Westerlands under the Lannisters, and so the war is well and truly getting into full swing. And Aegon and Aemond are both keen to fly out with their dragons and join the battle, but they are convinced to hold off at least for now, because if the king dies in battle, then what's the point of the war? So they're trying to be cautious. Thanks for the donation from Rayday, who says, Kristen is Prime Minister? Don't you mean War Crime Minister? Yeah, no, I expect so. I mean, that's the thing. Kristen has done so many messed up things, like murdering Lyman and murdering Joffrey. Can we trust him to command an army without doing something horrible? Zay Vicious says, where did Alicent get that cloth she gave to Kristen? Yeah, so they farewell each other before Kristen marches off, and I believe she gives him a favor, a little piece of fabric from her bodice, which is like a symbol of their love and their connection and their chivalrous romantic relationship in a purely chaste, knightly sense, of course. But, Gwaine, her brother, sees that, these guys seem close, Kristen and Alicent. Like, what's going on between those two? There's a great irony that Kristen and Alicent are doing this, chivalric knightly thing of, oh, my lady, your favor, so that I might be good and noble to you, when, 5 minutes ago, they were having, messy animal sex, forbidden animal sex in her quarters earlier. So the contrast between this romantic, knightly, noble interaction they have versus the intimate, visceral, forbidden relationship is really fun. The Greens are really all about layers of duplicitousness, layers of pretending. Alicent talked about pretending and duty to Helena last episode, and we really see that pretending going on here as well. They're really caught in a trap of their own devising, the Greens. I mean, the Blacks as well, of course, have a lot of deception and lies, and, Rhaenyra cut through some of that with Daemon last episode, which was cathartic. So, yeah. Thank you for the donation from Swifty, who says, I enjoyed how funny this season is. Yeah, this season has been a really amazing connection of, horror and serious drama, but mixed in with some fairly hysterical scenes. We'll get to it, but the scenes with Simon Strong on Harrenhal were very funny. In a way that actually really fit the themes of the story as well. So we will get to that. So after the Green Council scene, we're on Dragonstone, and we see Mysaria with Rhaenyra. So last episode, Mysaria saved Rhaenyra's life, because Mysaria warned Dragonstone that Arik was at Dragonstone to kill Rhaenyra. And at that time, Mysaria was leaving. She was saying, I'm giving up on having power and influence, and I'm just going to go to the east. But because Rhaenyra freed Mysaria, she says that, well, Rhaenyra is a merciful leader in a way that other leaders are not. And so it sort of rekindles some hope in Mysaria that maybe I can steer politics in the right direction. Because Mysaria hopes to protect the small folk and get justice for the small folk, to do things like ending the child fighting pits that we saw last season. And Mysaria also would like to get some revenge on the Greens, because Alicent burned her house down. Mysaria had to struggle all her life to escape slavery, to get some coin together, and she eventually succeeded in building a home, and indeed building a network of spies and working with Otto, but that all was burned, and so she has some desire for revenge against the Greens. And I wonder, those two goals, Mysaria wanting revenge versus Mysaria wanting political goals to protect the small folk, I wonder if those goals might clash at all. When it comes down to it, what will Mysaria prioritize? Helping small folk or killing Greens? What exactly is her goal? She's very mysterious, Mysaria. And I'm never quite sure if she's being entirely honest to people. When Mysaria said that, oh yeah, I'm just going to leave Westeros and never do politics again, do you think that she was, being completely honest? Or do you think Mysaria actually was planning on having some influence still? I mean, even if Mysaria did go across the Narrow Sea to Essos, maybe she still could have pulled some strings. She still seems to have some spies and some connections in King's Landing, even after some of her spies were removed. We still don't know what has happened to Mazaria's spies Talia and Little John, who we saw last season. I hope they're okay. It sounds as though Mazaria wants to get revenge on the Greens for them, for Talia and for John. I wonder how much of a personal connection Mazaria had with some of those people. So yeah, Mazaria's got a lot of interesting motivations going on. And so Mazaria says to Rhaenyra, hey, since I saved your life, I want you to accept me as one of your advisors, one of your counselors. And Rhaenyra is kind of surprised by that, but accepts Mazaria. Mazaria is, a bit dangerous and untrustworthy. Mazaria did help arrange the murder of Jaehaerys, which has been a disaster for Rhaenyra, but Rhaenyra sees that Mazaria is valuable, she's useful, she's got spies, she knows the Red Keep, so she is an asset, albeit a mysterious and a dangerous one. They also discussed the dragon Seasmoke. So Seasmoke was the dragon of Laenor Velaryon. Laenor then faked his own death and went east, and now Seasmoke has been restless. We saw him flying around Adam on Driftmark last episode, and now apparently Seasmoke is in Dragonstone flying around. What is Seasmoke looking for? Interesting questions. Thank you for the donation from Frosty Beck, who says, what is your favorite dragon? I mean, Vhagar is cool, because Vhagar has so much history to her, and so much personality to her. She's the biggest and strongest dragon as well, Aemon's dragon now. But I also enjoyed seeing Moondancer for the first time. I mean, Moondancer is interesting because they're giving Moondancer more of a role in the show than Moondancer has in the books. Like this scene when Baela swoops down on Kristen, that's not described in the books. In fact, at this point in the books, Moondancer isn't large enough for Baela to ride Moondancer. Moondancer is only the size of a horse in the books, and is very small, very fast, very slender. And eventually Baela does start riding Moondancer and loves riding Moondancer, but they've added a bit more Moondancer action a bit earlier on in the show. In the books, Moondancer is described as being a pale green color with pearl-colored horns and wing bones, and is very fast and nimble. And it's cool to see Moondancer in action. Even though Rhaenyra told Baela to, stay safe, stay up high so you won't get in any danger, Baela kind of disobeys Rhaenyra by flying down and almost grabbing Kristen or killing Kristen or whatever Baela was intending. So Baela, like a lot of the other kids, like Aegon and Aemond, sometimes goes against their older rulers in order to get some action and prove themselves. Turns out it's kind of dangerous giving kids giant dragons. Mother Nix, thank you for the donation, says that maybe Laenor isn't dead, but he rejected the bond with his dragon Seasmoke, symbolized by cutting his hair, hence freeing up Seasmoke to be claimed by someone else. Or maybe with time, the bond is weakened and broken. So yeah, that's kind of the question with Seasmoke is it possible for someone else to ride Seasmoke and claim Seasmoke if Laenor is still alive in the East? It's an open question, because in the books it seems that no one can claim a dragon while the dragon's rider is still alive. It seems that way, but it's not 100% clear if it's an absolute watertight rule. So yeah, I mean, maybe by going away, Laenor has broken or weakened that bond with Seasmoke, and maybe it is possible for someone else to ride Seasmoke while Laenor is alive. We don't know. Thanks for the donation from Christina, who says, why don't characters bond with the wild dragons? Is having multiple dragon bonds a Game of Thrones retcon? So yeah, there are 5 wild dragons on Dragonstone. There's Vermithor, Silverwing, the Cannibal, Sheepstealer, Grey Ghost, and Seasmoke at the moment. And yeah, the characters talked last season about how those dragons are important and could be useful in this war. So yeah, maybe they will try to use them. But the question will be, who can ride them will be the question. Because not just anyone can ride a dragon. You got to be a Targaryen to ride a dragon. You ask, is it a retcon in Game of Thrones to bond with multiple dragons? Yeah, so it is a little different in the Game of Thrones show, because we see Daenerys apparently controlling 3 dragons at once. Drogon, Viserion, and Rhaegal. And she doesn't seem to have much problem, like, controlling all 3 dragons. Like, she uses them at the Battle for Meereen in Season 6. So she can apparently just command all of them without any trouble. In the books, that hasn't happened, at least not yet. In the books, it seems as though it's going to be a good idea to get riders for each of those 3 dragons. And so there's lots of theories about who the riders of Daenerys' 3 dragons might be. Maybe, like in the show, Jon Snow will claim one of her dragons, maybe Rhaegal. As for the 3rd dragon, Viserion, some people think maybe Tyrion will ride Viserion. There are theories that Tyrion might be secretly a Targaryen. There's a character called Young Griff, who is a Targaryen, or a Targaryen bastard. Maybe he will claim Viserion. There's a lot of different theories. Maybe Euron will claim one of the dragons by magic, similar to how the Night King claims Viserion. There's a lot of possibilities. But that's one of the questions that the book talks about is... like, how possible is it to control a dragon if the dragon doesn't have a rider? Like, maybe it's possible for some of these wild dragons, like Vermithor and Silverwing and Seasmoke. Maybe the Blacks and the Greens could use those dragons in battle without them having a rider. But we've seen how, like, even when they do have a rider, Vhagar disobeys Aemond, and Arax disobeys Luke a bit. So... these are very, very dangerous, mysterious weapons. No one's quite sure how to control them. So, yeah, this will be an issue as it continues. Thanks for the donation from Jacob, who says, I wanted Rhaena to try to claim Seasmoke. I feel like it's been foreshadowed since Laena comforted her as a kid, since Laena also didn't have a dragon till she claimed Vhagar. Yeah, so we get a lot of Rhaena time this episode. So Rhaena... is one of the daughters of Daemon and Laena. And so, yeah, in Season 1, Episode 6, Rhaena was talking about how she feels left out because she doesn't have a dragon, and her mother, Laena, was saying that, well, I claimed Vhagar later in life, maybe you can claim a dragon as well. So yeah, it would make sense for Rhaena to try and claim a dragon, like maybe Seasmoke or one of those other wild dragons. That's definitely a possibility. Because Laena feels a lot of resentment. The actor was talking about how Baelor has a dragon, Moondancer, and Baelor got to grow up on Driftmark with Rhaenys and with Corlys, with the Velaryon family, whereas Rhaena grew up on Dragonstone with her stepmom Rhaenyra and her father Daemon, and Daemon is not exactly Father of the Year. And now Rhaena's betrothed, Luke, is dead, and it's unclear what Rhaena's political future is. We see Corlys and Rhaenys talk about that. Who's going to rule Driftmark? Because the plan was for Rhaena and Luke to rule Driftmark, but now Luke's dead, and so, like, who will Rhaena marry? What will Rhaena's future be? She's totally in limbo, and that's partly because she doesn't have a dragon, and so she's not considered as important, and so that's part of why Rhaenyra sends Rhaena away over to the east with her little kids. So really interesting situation that Rhaena is in here. So let's continue. This is the Rhaena conversation, where Rhaenyra has realized that her kids aren't safe. So we know that Rhaenyra has 1, 2, 3, 4 surviving kids at the moment after the death of Luke. And Rhaenyra wants to keep her kids safe. Little Aegon the Younger and Viserys are those little blonde kids. They're not going to be useful in this war. They're just a vulnerability. If, Rhaenyra was almost murdered in her bed last episode, and before that, the little Jaehaerys was killed in the Red Keep. So it seems that nowhere is safe. The Blacks and the Greens are willing to murder each other's children, so it seems like a very good idea to get Aegon and Viserys far away, and little Joffrey as well. So Rhaenyra entrusts her children to Rhaena. And also the little dragons as well. Joffrey has a little hatchling dragon called Tyraxes. Aegon has a little dragon called Stormcloud. Viserys has an egg. And so she wants to send those kids away. She wants Joffrey to stay in the Vale with Lady Jane Arryn with his dragon Tyraxes, because because Jace promised that the Blacks would give Jane Arryn a dragon to protect the Vale. And it's kind of tricksy that they give Jane Tyraxes, because Tyraxes is not old enough to fight. Tyraxes is too small to fight, really, at this point. I mean, in the books at this point, Tyraxes is big enough to fly. Joffrey can fly Tyraxes at this point in the book, but it seems that in the show, Tyraxes is too young for that at the moment. So Tyraxes is not going to be super useful to protect the Vale, but that's what Rhaenyra gives Jane. Hopefully Jane will not be cross about that. And the plan is that Joffrey and Tyraxes will stay in the Vale with Jane Arryn, while little Aegon and little Viserys and Rhaena will go further on. They will go east across the sea to Pentos, because remember that guy Reggio Horatus was hosting Laena and Daemon and Baelor and Rhaena for a while in Season 1, Episode 6. In the books, Baelor and Rhaena were actually born in Pentos. So this is kind of their home. Although, the way Rhaena says at this episode, she's like, oh, that's where my mother died. So it seems like Pentos has more of a negative feeling for Rhaena here, which is, fair enough. She does not have good memories of Pentos. So she feels really shitty about being sent away. And Rhaenyra, fascinatingly, Rhaenyra says, oh, hey, Rhaena, I need you to be a mother to my children. And it's ironic because, remember in Season 1, Episode 1, when Rhaenyra's mother, Emma, was saying, hey, Rhaenyra, your job is to be a mother. Your job is to produce heirs, give birth, and that's your lot in life because you're a royal woman. And Rhaenyra was saying, I don't want that. That's not me. I want to ride into battle like a knight. I don't want to be forced into the role of being a mother. And ironically, Rhaenyra is now doing the same thing to Rhaena. She's saying, you have to be a mother because you're the royal female. You've got to look after my kids for me. And so it's a really... It's messed up. It's just like Otto forced Alicent into politics, then Alicent forced Aegon, then Aegon forced Jaehaerys. This generational, unwanted duty and responsibility passed down really sucks. And Rhaena is so aware that if Rhaena had a dragon, this wouldn't be happening to her because she would be a military asset and she wouldn't be forced into the role of mother. So it's that gender stuff that Game of Thrones has always been playing with Arya and Cersei and Brienne, women going up against the barriers and the social roles that they are expected to play in this world. Although, as Baelor says, Rhaena is a lot safer getting away from Westeros. She's a lot less likely to be murdered in her bed if she's not in Westeros, so she does have that going for her. But that seems like little comfort for Rhaena at this time. Thanks for the donation from Christy, who says, did that 4-pack carton of eggs have Dany's dragon's colors? Let's have a look. So yeah, I mean, it is a lot of trust that Rhaenyra is giving to Rhaena. Like, it is a pretty big deal that Rhaenyra is giving Rhaena, like, 3 of her sons, 2 of her dragons, and 4 of her dragon's eggs. Like, that is enormously valuable and politically important. So it is a lot of trust that she's showing in Rhaena, even if Rhaena doesn't necessarily want it. So these are the 4 eggs. In the inside the episode, showrunner Ryan Condal said that 3 of these eggs are the eggs that Daemon uncovered, that Syrax laid these eggs on Dragonstone, and the other egg is Viserys's egg. Am I getting that right? Aegon has the dragon Stormcloud, and Viserys has the has a dragon egg. Is that true? I better Google that real quick. Yes, Stormcloud was Aegon's dragon, and Viserys only has an egg. So little Viserys, might get a dragon if that egg hatches. But the other thing is that maybe one of these dragon eggs will hatch for Rhaena, and maybe Rhaena will finally get a dragon. Maybe she'll get a hatchling, maybe she'll claim a dragon. There's a lot of different possibilities, a lot of options. And it is quite mysterious how exactly people acquire dragons and all the different ways that can happen. Thanks for the donation from Jess, who says, Rhaenyra's relationship with her stepdaughters is at least way more healthy than Rhaenyra's relationship with her stepmother. she genuinely trusts and loves them. Yeah, well, Alicent is Rhaenyra's stepmother, technically, because Alicent married Viserys, Rhaenyra's father. I remember in Season 1 when Alicent wore the green dress and she came up to Rhaenyra and said, stepdaughter. And that was kind of the moment when their relationship died, their friendship died, was when Alicent stopped being Rhaenyra's friend and started being her stepmother. So, yeah, I mean, maybe Rhaenyra is sort of conscious of that in her relationship with her stepdaughters, Baelor and Rhaena. Maybe she's trying to be better to them than Alicent is to her. Chase says, I'm tired of dragons being mentioned but not shown. Yeah, I imagine they're being selective with how they spend their CGI budget, right? But yeah, there are a lot of dragons that have been mentioned that we've never seen, including the dragons Tyraxes and Stormcloud, the dragons of Joffrey and Aegon. So I think that we see little travel cases for these dragons in this scene here. We don't actually get to see the dragons themselves, which is kind of lame. I would have liked if we got to see like a glimpse of the little dragons at least, but not yet, alas. Let's do a little dragon corner, shall we? Just to remind ourselves. So I don't think we've got all the hatchlings on this, unfortunately, actually. But so Rhaenyra has Syrax, Daemon has Caraxes, Rhaenys has Melis, Jace has Vermax, Luke's dragon Arax is dead. Joffrey has Tyraxes, who is apparently just a hatchling and can't be flown yet, apparently. Baelor has Moondancer, who we see flying this episode for the first time. And then there's the unclaimed dragons on Dragonstone, Vermithor, Silverwing, Seasmoke, Cannibal, Grey Ghost, Sheepstealer, all up for grabs, while the Greens have Sunfire, Vhagar, Dreamfire, and Daron has Tessarion over in Old Town. And so, yeah, there is also the little hatchling Stormcloud for Aegon. So these are the dragons that are in play at the moment. Someone in the gave a donation and asked about Shrykos. So, yeah, Shrykos and Morgul were the little hatchling dragons of Jaehaerys and Jaehaera, I think. And we haven't seen them yet, and they haven't been mentioned yet, so we don't know if they actually exist at this point. So there may even be some other little hatchlings around. So yeah, we are now on the precipice of these dragons riding to war, it seems. So things could rapidly get messy. So if you've been frustrated about not seeing enough dragons, I think that is going to change pretty soon. All right, what were we up to? We were discussing Rhaena leaving Dragonstone with Aegon and Viserys and with Joffrey. So yeah, this is a responsibility that Rhaena does not want, but this is what she's being forced to do. This is her duty, while Baelor gets to still stay at home and be part of the family and gets to participate in the war, for better and for worse. I thought it was really sad and brutal how Rhaenyra says, "Oh, it really breaks my heart to part with my boys, Joffrey and Aegon and Viserys." But Rhaenyra does not say that it breaks her heart to part with Rhaena. You know? Like, I feel Rhaena feels a bit unloved and rejected. And it really sucks. It really sucks. Also, Mazzaria says that Seasmoke seems lonely. And then we cut to this shot of Mazzaria standing alone. So maybe Mazzaria's feeling lonely. And also, Rhaenyra just, borderline broke up with her husband, Daemon. So maybe Rhaenyra's feeling lonely as well. I mean, Rhaenyra's just giving away 3 of her children. Rhaenyra doesn't know if she'll see those children ever again. We're in a war right now. People are being assassinated. So it's a scary, lonely time. Inside the episode, Rhaenyra's actor Emma Darcy said that Rhaenyra is like consciously separating herself from her motherhood. Because Rhaenyra feels so intensely that she is caught between trying to be a mother and trying to be a queen. And sometimes those two things are incompatible, like when she was busy giving birth to the stillborn baby Visenya in Season 1, while the men were starting a war in her absence. So Emma says that Rhaenyra is now deliberately trying to give up her children, tragically having to sort of give up that connection for now, while she can focus on the war and try and do her duty as a queen. Let's talk about Harrenhal. This is exciting stuff. So Daemon has been talking all season, even last season, that he wants to go to Harrenhal, take the biggest castle in the realm at the center of Westeros, rally the Riverlands, rally a giant army there, and then win the goddamn war. That is Daemon's plan. That also is what Criston and Aemond want to do. And so Daemon finally, after his breakup conversation with Rhaenyra, he flies to Harrenhal. And so we see here, this is the God's Eye Lake, which is right next to Harrenhal, and this island here is the Isle of Faces, which is the most magical place in Westeros, south of the Wall, I think it's fair to say. The Isle of Faces is covered in weirwood trees, the magical trees of the old gods, and the Isle of Faces is apparently inhabited by the Green Men, who are these antlered, mysterious priests of the old gods who guard the Isle of Faces. And the Isle is like right there in the center of Westeros, but it's super mysterious because no one seems to be able to go there. Whenever anyone tries to go to the Isle of Faces, they get chased away or blown away by winds and by ravens. So it seems as though the magic of the old gods, the magic of the Green Men perhaps, is protecting the Isle of Faces and preventing anyone from investigating what's going on there. But this place has like massive historical importance because the Isle of Faces is where the Pact was signed. This is where the ancient war between the humans and the Children of the Forest was ended in the Pact. And so the weirwood trees on the Isle of Faces were carved with faces to commemorate the Pact, and so it became this like locus of magic. There are some crazy theories, like that possibly the Pact was sealed with some kind of interspecies orgy between the humans and the Children of the Forest. Maybe that's what produced the Green Men. We don't know. Apparently Howland Reed went to the Isle of Faces in the Game of Thrones books, which is interesting. Howland Reed was like Ned Stark's BFF, and they fought at the Tower of Joy together. It's this super mysterious place. There's all these interesting theories in the books about like maybe Bran will become some kind of weirwood old god's king and will rule from the Isle of Faces in the God's Eye. I mean, the name God's Eye evokes the eyes of the weirwood trees that can magically see across time and space. Some people think that maybe Rhaegar and Lyanna, Jon Snow's parents, got married at the Isle of Faces. That's an interesting theory, and then maybe Bran will discover that by looking through the eyes of the weirwood trees. Super, super interesting place, and like, you know, maybe this is the only glimpse that we'll get of it. Well, there's another glimpse in the trailer. Maybe we'll only get these little short moments looking at the Isle of Faces, but it is evocative to see them there, because the Isle of Faces, this place of old gods' magic, is right next to Harrenhal. And Harrenhal is the spookiest place in Westeros. I think that poor Quentin, who is one of the best analysts and writers about the Game of Thrones books, describes it as like being at the intersection of the political and the magical, between the political and the supernatural, between the mundane and the magical. Harrenhal has so much like rich symbolism to it, because Harrenhal has this whole history. Harrenhal was built by Harren the Black, who was like this iron-born king who conquered the Riverlands, and he enslaved the people of the Riverlands to build this gargantuan, monstrous castle as a monument to his own awesomeness. Harrenhal was meant to show his ultimate conquest and his legacy, and he's going to live forever. It's about hubris and ambition. And like, you know, Ozymandias, it all went to shit. And so after spending 40 years building this gigantic castle, on the very day that Harrenhal was completed, Aegon the Conqueror arrived with his dragons. So Harren had a castle that was like too powerful for any army to defeat, but it can't stop dragons. And so Aegon came along and burned Harrenhal and everyone in it. And the castle burned so hot that the towers, the stone melted and dripped down like candle wax. And so this castle was reduced to this ruin, this spooky ruin. And the ruins are still very valuable. It's still usable as a powerful castle, but it's a very spooky ruin. And so it's said to be cursed. It's said to be haunted. It's said that the ghosts of Harren and his family still walk the halls of Harrenhal, these ghosts that walk aflame. And in the time of Game of Thrones, we see Arya go to Harrenhal, and this is where Arya suffers imprisonment and torture and slave labor. She sees torture in Harrenhal. And so we sort of see like it's like the metaphysical consequences of the lust for power, right? Like Harrenhal is a monument to people people's lust for power, and it shows the horror, the horrific consequences of that lust for power. The result of Harren's lust for power is this monstrous haunted ruin that does nothing but brings suffering to thousands of people. I think that's the meaning. It's about how wrong it is to enslave and to war for the sake of your own hubris. And so that horror has this supernatural element to it. It seems as though Harrenhal is cursed, because everyone who holds Harrenhal ends up dying some horrifying death. So, like in the Game of Thrones books, Janos Slynt, Tywin Lannister, Armory Lorch, Vargo Hoat, the Mountain, Polliver, all of them control Harrenhal briefly for some amount of time, and all of them die horribly. Currently, in the Game of Thrones books, Littlefinger is the Lord of Harrenhal. He hasn't been to Harrenhal yet, but a lot of people speculate that Littlefinger is probably also going to die a horrible death in the books, so he'll be another one. And, historically, like, after Harrenhal, there were all these other houses. There was Cohaerus and Harroway, and Towers were other houses who ruled Harrenhal, and all of them went extinct. And so after them, it was House Strong who became the rulers of Harrenhal. Lionel Strong was the Lord of Harrenhal, and then his son Larys murdered Lionel and murdered Harwin. And so Larys Strong is now the Lord of Harrenhal. And he also hasn't been there, which might be a smart thing, given the curse. So yeah, deeply spooky, scary place, and they really lean into that in this episode of Hot D, because Daemon has these mystical visions, and it's exciting stuff. So let's talk about that. So Daemon arrives at Harrenhal. He wants a fight. He's just had this awful emotional conversation with his wife Rhaenyra. All he's wanted to do for episodes and episodes now is win a glorious battle to control the castle, because the only way that Daemon seems to know how to express his feelings is by violence. And so he arrives at Harrenhal, and he's got his sword, he's got his armor, he's so stoked for a big battle, but he finds that he's not on a battleground, he's in a haunted house. It's real goofy Halloween shit in here. Like, there's bats going around, and there's spooky hallways and weird noises. He looks over this hall, which is the same room where the Harrenhal Council happened. Remember at the start of Season 1, Episode 1, we saw Harrenhal when all the lords got together and chose Viserys as the heir to the throne. So this is where that, like, monumental decision was made. Also, before Robert's Rebellion, like 20 years before the main story of Game of Thrones, there was a tournament at Harrenhal when the Mad King was king, and a lot of the lords there were plotting against the Mad King. His son Rhaegar was plotting against the Mad King. Rhaegar and Lyanna probably met and hooked up for the first time at Harrenhal. It was this big party where everyone was plotting to overthrow the king. It's kind of where, like, the whole setup for the main Game of Thrones story happened, was here at Harrenhal. So all the important stuff happens here. Like, I think that Harrenhal is like a representation of Westeros in miniature. It's a microcosm. It's a synecdoche. It's a little symbolic representation of the realm at large. And so what it represents is the horror and the damage caused by people's lust for power. So Daemon rocks up, he goes through the haunted house. We see some weirwood roots, which is really interesting. It's interesting to me that, like, Harrenhal was burned. Harrenhal was incinerated by Aegon, but there are still multiple weirwood trees here, it seems. I don't know if those weirwoods grew after the burning, or if Aegon did not burn the trees. I don't know, but it indicates to us that there are magics at work here. The magic of the old gods is associated with the weirwoods, and in the books, weirwoods and old gods magic cause people to have dreams. Even people who don't have blood of the first men, like Jaime Lannister sleeps with his head on a weirwood stump in Game of Thrones books, and so he has this crazy dream about Brienne, and they're naked, and the Kingsguard are there, and he has this crazy trippy vision. So it is totally in keeping with the lore and the canon of the books that Daemon also has a crazy dream here. And it's ironic because Daemon last season was saying that, well, Viserys was interested in dreams and visions, but that's dumb. Like, dreams didn't make us kings, dragons did. Daemon wants to believe that, like, he's just interested in mundane things, not magic. But here, Daemon experiences magic, and it's very real to him, and it's very scary to him. I mean, I think basically what's going on in this scene is that Daemon came here looking for an enemy to fight. But when he has his visions, exploring his guilt for his treatment of Rhaenyra and the murder of Jaehaerys, he realizes that his enemy is himself. Daemon's own actions are his worst enemy. He is his own worst enemy. And that's basically what Rhaenyra said last episode, right? Rhaenyra was saying, Daemon, it's not that Viserys took away the throne from you. You took the throne away from yourself through your terrible behavior. Your treason, your disobedience, your murders, your sick burns, all of your reckless behavior is why you lost what you wanted. That's why you lost the approval of your brother. That's why you're losing me, your wife, is because your choices have had these consequences. And so I think that is what's being explored in these scenes. Daemon is seeing that, oh, I'm the bad guy. I am my own worst enemy. I created all of my problems. So how is that going to affect him? Is Daemon going to actually do some introspection and actually become a better person? Or is he just going to create more problems for himself? There is a very fun Halloween-y shot with bats flying around in the haunted house here. Bats are screeching and flying around. And that does connect to Mad Danelle Lothston. So the Lothstons are one of the families who control Harrenhal at one point later in the story. We may see Mad Danelle Lothston in the Night of the Seven Kingdoms, the new Game of Thrones spin-off show that's currently being filmed. We may eventually see Mad Danelle Lothston in that show. Because Mad Danelle Lothston, yeah, she lives at the time of Dunk and Egg, so like after Hot D and before Game of Thrones. And she ruled Harrenhal, and she was a little off. I think it's fair to say. Danelle Lothston allegedly got giant bats to fly out from Harrenhal and would steal naughty children, and then Danelle Lothston would cook them in a pot and then eat them, or bathe in their blood to keep her youth or something. And so eventually Danelle Lothston had to be removed. So she's another house that went extinct who ruled Harrenhal. So, yeah, the bats might be a bit of a nod to Mad Danelle Lothston, which is fun. So, yeah, spooky place for spooky people. And so Daemon bursts into this room in Harrenhal, really hoping for a fight. And he gets Simon Strong. So Simon Strong is like the granduncle of Lord Larys Strong. And Simon Strong does not put up a fight against Daemon. Simon immediately just says, okay, we surrender the castle to you. I swear fealty to Rhaenyra. Whatever, I'm your man. Now let's talk supper. It's so funny how, like, you know, this guy is in control of the biggest castle in Westeros. But he's not really interested in war or battle. You get the sense that he would have sworn loyalty to literally whoever walked into this room. Like, Daemon walked in, so he was happy to go like, oh, yeah, okay, I swear to Rhaenyra. You get the sense that if, like, Aemond or Aegon walked in, Simon would have sworn to Aegon instead. Simon, like Rhaenys, is an older person and has seen some stuff and is not interested in playing the young man's game of battling and burning and killing for glory. He's focusing on what's really important in life, which is venison with cabbage and peas. Simon Strong has his priorities straight, and I respect that. But it's just the opposite of what Daemon is looking for. I think that Simon so beautifully deconstructs everything that Daemon is and wants, because Daemon is all about, yeah, violence, glory, legacy, thrones. But by the end of the scene, Daemon's going, yeah, the throne, yeah, it's this chair that's made out of swords. That's why we're murdering each other, is for a chair that's made out of swords. Simon so beautifully shows the absurdity of killing for legacy, and Harrenhal itself is a representation of that. Because Harren killed thousands of people so that he could have this giant castle Harrenhal. But what does it get him in the end? Incineration and a ruin. That's what came of Harrenhal. And that's what comes of all of these brutal dreams of conquest. So it's a warning to Daemon, and it's a warning to Rhaenyra and to all of these boys clamoring for war that it's not going to make your life better. So Simon says, hey, let's just enjoy some venison, and we see his his gormless sons and grandsons over here who are running the place. And yeah, so you'll notice that Harrenhal, it's the biggest castle in Westeros, but it's got like 5 people living in it apparently, which has happened at various times in Harrenhal's history because it is so gigantic. It's like impossible to actually maintain the entire place, especially given that, you know, half the castle has holes in the roof because Aegon burned it. And so it's more like these guys are just squatting in the ruins of this place as opposed to actually ruling it. So, yeah, they're enjoying the venison. Daemon refuses to eat because he's worried about poison. Daemon makes a good point, which is that poison is a pretty easy way to kill a dragon rider. It's pretty hard to kill a dragon rider in battle, but it's pretty easy to put some poison in their soup. So that's definitely something to think about in this war. Is the possibility of poison and other subterfuge. So they discuss Larys Strong. So Larys Strong is currently technically the Lord of Harrenhal. And it's really interesting that Larys's grunkle Simon hates Larys. He says that Larys is a scourge on this family. He's no lord of mine. And Simon basically says, oh yeah, I'm pretty sure that Larys murdered Lionel and Harwin. He's pretty sure that Larys just murdered half this family, so that's why he hates Larys. But you also wonder, like, what else is the history here? Like, what else? Like, what was Larys's life like when he grew up at Harrenhal? There's lots of wild theories that maybe Larys has some magic power as a greenseer, as a skin changer, because that could explain how he's getting all of his information. We've never seen Larys have spies. Like, we've seen Mazaria's spies, but we've never seen Larys's spies. So how does he know what he knows? Maybe it's magic. And Harrenhal is right next to the Isle of Faces, which is the center of Old God's magic in this world. So I wonder if Larys dabbled in that magic when he was here, when he was younger. And I wonder if that might connect to Alice Rivers. So this woman here is Alice Rivers. Now, Alice Rivers is a wet nurse. Her job is to breastfeed babies, at least in the books. But she is also alleged to be a witch. There's all these different rumors about who Alice Rivers really is, but some say that she uses potions to control men, and some say that she lays with demons to gain forbidden knowledge, and no one's quite sure like where she came from. Like, some people say that Alice Rivers was a bastard daughter of Lionel Strong, but other people say that Alice is actually much older than she looks, and she may have actually been wet nurse to Lionel Strong. So no one knows where she comes from or who she is, but she seems to have some kind of mystical power. And so it just seems like she's connected to these visions that Daemon has later. Like, Daemon sees Alice after he comes out of his vision, and he's standing at a weirwood tree. Again, emphasizing that this is Old God's magic that's causing these visions. So Alice, there's all these theories about Alice, like maybe Alice is a greenseer, maybe Alice is connected to that magic, maybe Alice taught Larys the magic of the Old Gods. That is wild speculation. We don't know if Alice or Larys are greenseers, but there's a million possibilities here. Some people speculate that Alice might be an ancestor of the Ghost of Highheart, who is an obscure but very important character in the books, who, like, low-key caused Jon Snow to be born because the Ghost of Highheart said that Aerys should marry Rhaella. Well, she said that the prince that was promised would come of the line of Aerys and Rhaella. It's a whole thing. And like, what is Alice and Larys's connection to the Green Men? Million possibilities. Million possibilities. What else should we say about Alice? She well, yeah, the fact that she looks younger than she is might hint that she might use a glamour to look younger, like Melisandre. That's a possibility. But yeah, it's not clear just how much magic she has. Very mysterious. We will talk about her more. So anyway, Simon's having dinner with Daemon, and Daemon casually mentions that, oh, by the way, I'm the king. Daemon says, call me your grace. Not just prince, your grace. So Daemon is doing treason. Classic Daemon. He's mad, so his reaction is to do some treason. Daemon is meant to be only the king consort to Rhaenyra. Rhaenyra is the queen. Rhaenyra is the ruler. Daemon is merely her husband. That's what's meant to be happening. But here Daemon is saying, no, I'm the king. I'm the ruler. Last episode, Corlys and Rhaenys were talking about, hey, do you think that Daemon might try to steal Rhaenyra's throne? Yeah. Yeah, no, apparently he does. Apparently he does want to steal Rhaenyra's throne. I mean, he might not follow through on this. Remember last season when he went to Dragonstone and declared himself heir to the throne? He didn't actually follow through on that. Daemon has supported Viserys as king and, has supported Rhaenyra as queen. He crowned Viserys, he crowned Rhaenyra. Maybe Daemon won't steal their throne, but at least right now he's saying that I'm the king, and he is threatening Rhaenyra's position. That is correct, Vale of Maya. Thanks for the super chat. Thanks, Makalaka, who says, who do you think Alice Rivers is worshipping or aligning with since she appeared in front of the weirwood tree? Can't be old gods. I think it may be old gods that Alice is connected to. But, all of this magic is mysterious. I mean, it's interesting that, Daemon is a Targaryen, and he's having these visions that seem connected to the magic of the old gods. It seems sometimes as though the Targaryens' magic visions are more connected to their dragons, more connected to fire magic, which you'd think would be kind of opposite to the old god magic of the weirwood trees. But, the rules of magic are wibbly-wobbly in this world. George Martin has said that he's not trying to make magic make perfect logical scientific sense. It doesn't operate by absolute rules. It's magic. And it's mysterious. And it's wibbly-wobbly. And it makes sense that that's how we're seeing it here. So yeah, Daemon's doing some light treason, and he wants to use Harrenhal as a base to rally soldiers to win this war. And Daemon asks about the Brackens and the Blackwoods, and Simon Strong says, well, no one even remembers why these guys are fighting. They've just done one atrocity to each other, then another. It's just cycles of vengeance for vengeance for vengeance. Sin begets sin begets sin. And that's what we were talking about at the start of this live stream. I think the symbolism of the burning mill, the symbolism of the circular table here, the symbolism of the circular altar in the sept, it's the cycle, it's the circle, it's the cycle of violence and of vengeance over and over and over. And so, in the same way that the Brackens and the Blackwoods conflict is just tragic and pointless, the conflict between Aegon and Rhaenyra is rapidly becoming endless, pointless, and horrible. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that this is a series about the horror and the pointlessness of war. So, Daemon wants to talk to Lord Grover Tully, because the Tullys rule the Riverlands. Grover Tully is, in theory, the most powerful person in the Riverlands. But Simon says that Grover Tully can no longer speak and can no longer control his bowels. And I just love Daemon's reaction to that. He does not want to hear about Grover Tully's bowels, but that's the reality of the situation. And so it seems like it's not going to be easy to get the Riverlords together. There is a long history of the Riverlords squabbling and being invaded by other people. Like, being at the center of Westeros means that the Riverlands have been invaded and conquered and mucked about many, many times in their history. So we talked about Simon, we talked about Daemon, we talked about poison. Let's continue to the next scene. So, at the Red Keep, Criston is riding to war. He wants to attack the rebel houses in the Crown Lands and turn them to his side. So he's got a fairly small army, because the big armies from the Reach and the Westerlands haven't arrived yet. So he's riding off with a small army, and we meet Gwaine Hightower. So Gwaine Hightower is a son of Otto Hightower, a brother of Alicent Hightower, and he's a bit of a douche. I mean, let's not mince words. He's a bit arrogant, and he's a bit rude to Criston. I mean, Gwaine is understandably mad at Criston because Criston has taken his father's job. I mean, a lot of the power and influence and prestige of House Hightower comes from the fact that Otto Hightower was Hand of the King for years and years and years and years, which gives them a lot of influence. But Criston has now taken that spot because of Aegon's decision last episode, and so Gwaine is a bit peeved about that, and he throws some shade at Criston for being a Dornishman. Remember in Season 1, Episode 1, when we were introduced to Criston Cole, and Alicent said, "Gods, he's Dornish." Kristen is not Dornish in the books, I don't think. But yeah, in the show, Kristen is apparently Dornish, but he served with House Dondarrion in the Stormlands. And now he's working for Reachman in King's Landing, which is politically sort of complicated because Dorne is, on the borderlands between the Stormlands and the Reach and all that. And there's a long history of war, ugly war, between Dorne and the Stormlands and the Reach. Dornishmen have invaded and burned Old Town a bunch of times. They burned Highgarden. They burned the sacred Oaken Seat, which was the seat of the Gardeners for thousands of years. There is blood between the Dornishmen and the Reach. And so I think that's part of why Gwaine is saying, oh, you're a Dornishman. There's bad blood there. But I mean, it's interesting that Kristen was serving a Stormlands House Dondarrion. Like, Kristen may have been fighting against Dornish people when he was serving the Dondarrions. So I'm curious about, like, what Kristen's history is. Like, how did he end up there? He's at, like, this interesting sort of, like, cultural intersection here. And Gwaine is mad about it. And so we sort of go through an arc here in this episode where Gwaine disrespects Kristen at the start, but later shows Kristen a bit more respect when Kristen saves his life from Moondancer. And, there's also a class thing going on here, because Kristen is like a common-born guy. He's not noble, he's not a lord, but he's risen up the ranks so quickly, he's failed upwards so spectacularly that he is now not only Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, but the Hand of the King. And Gwaine, as one of the most privileged people in this world, as one of the most upper-class people, a scion of one of the richest, most powerful noble houses, House Hightower, Gwaine is mad about Kristen's upward social mobility and disparages him for that. So there's like a class gap here. There's like a historical Dawn versus Stormlands thing going on here. That's some of the rift that's going on. And then we have this awkward farewell between Kristen and Alicent, where they're trying to act all sort of noble and chivalrous, and, in their head, they're just remembering the messy sex that they were having last episode. So there's this fun contrast between their appearance of chastity and chivalry and purity when they were just doing it like the Discovery Channel just last night, it seems. Or very recently, anyway. So they ride on out to war, and we briefly see Cheese getting eaten by a raven. So on Dragonstone, the Black Council want action. They haven't seen the armies on the march yet, but the councillors, especially Alfred Broom, are keen to go to war, whereas Rhaenyra is saying we should wait for allies, because Rhaenyra, it's very much on her mind what Rhaenys just said. Hey, we've got to avoid war here. So she's trying to avoid sending the dragons to war. She doesn't want to fire the nukes first, but her Black Councillors are very, very keen. We get some suggestion from Bartimus Celtigar that, well, hey, Rhaenyra, if you don't want to lead this war, we'll do the war for you. You can just go away somewhere safe. If you're too much of a wuss to do a war, we'll do the war for you. Just, give us authority to act. So they're kind of doing a light coup here, I think. They're just sort of suggesting that, hey, you should abdicate your power and let us be in charge, despite the fact that Rhaenyra has been very consistent and clear in saying that, no, I am in charge here. Don't take action without me. But the men are like, no, we can handle this if you want to go do some embroidery in the corner. That's kind of what's going on here. And Rhaenyra is pissed. Rhaenys is also pissed. And then Rhaenys stands up for Rhaenyra by saying, hey, remember Jaehaerys the Conciliator? Jaehaerys the Conciliator was one of, if not the best Targaryen kings ever. And he was great because he didn't go to war. He was great because he was patient. He was great because he created unity. He was great because he did diplomacy. So we should respect Rhaenyra for attempting the same thing. And Aegon the Conqueror, yeah, he was cool. He did wars, but he did not rule as long as Jaehaerys did. Many would say he did not rule as well as Jaehaerys did. And so Rhaenys is saying that Rhaenyra is attempting to do the same thing. So then we have a conversation between Rhaenys and Corlys. Rhaenys and Corlys are worried about their family, because Rhaena and Baela are kind of all they have left, and their future is uncertain. Corlys was wounded in the Stepstones last season, so he still is recovering physically, and Rhaenys is bringing him soup and bread to look after her ailing husband, which is very cute and nice. And so they have this conversation under the boardwalk. I'm sure they made out here when they were younger, and maybe still. And they talk about who's going to inherit Driftmark, because it was going to be Luke who inherits Driftmark, but then Luke got eaten by Vhagar, and so maybe Luke's younger brother Joffrey will inherit Driftmark, but as Corlys says, Luke is like 6 years old and doesn't know nothing, so maybe he should not be the heir to Driftmark. Maybe it should be Rhaena, but Corlys is like, well, Rhaena doesn't know anything about ships or dragons. Those are their options. They haven't got a lot of options for who should inherit Driftmark. Vaemond Velaryon is spinning in his grave right now, right? Because Vaemond Velaryon was a actual Velaryon who actually has experience and connection to Velaryon traditions and culture. And yet Vaemond was killed by Daemon so that Luke could inherit Driftmark, and now Luke's dead. And it's like, what a shit show, you know? What a disaster this has been for House Velaryon. And Rhaenys is saying, like, hey, like, we're at war. I don't know how much time we have to sort this out. Like, we need to safeguard our family's future before things get any hairier. And Corlys doesn't... He leaves. He wants to get back to his ships. Corlys is kind of avoiding this hard decision, it seems. Corlys was so, like, set on ambition and set on getting his family members... onto the throne, or at least married to a ruler. And now with his wound, it seems like he's a little bit more thoughtful. Like previously we saw Corlys with Alan, and Corlys was really sort of mourning Luke and reflecting and thinking about his future. And so it seems like Corlys might have a bit of a different perspective. Like, he almost died. He's had a near-death experience, and so now he's really thinking carefully about what the future should be. And there continues to be a bit of a rift between him and Rhaenys, unfortunately. They love each other, but they're not always on the same page. So we already talked about Rhaena leaving Westeros with little Aegon, little Viserys, the dragon Stormcloud, the dragon Tyraxes, and 4 dragon eggs. And Rhaena is unhappy about being sent away. She feels resentful that she doesn't have a dragon, but she has this heavy responsibility to look after Rhaenyra's little sons. Thanks for the super chat from Nelly, who says that Aemond is incredibly fragile. When will he rise up? I mean, Aemond rose up last season when he ate Luke, and that was a bit of a disaster. I mean, Aemond has so much power. I think he has a responsibility to try to use it responsibly, because he really messed up when he accidentally got Luke killed. But at the same time, Aemond clearly does have a great desire to fight and to prove himself, so... we'll have to see what happens. So then we get this, like, absolutely heartbreaking scene between Alicent and her daughter Helaena. Helaena has just had her son Jaehaerys killed in front of her, partly, possibly, kind of at the fault of Alicent and Criston, because they were having forbidden sex instead of guarding Helaena and Jaehaerys. And so Helaena says simply, I feel sad about Jaehaerys. Helaena has this very sort of straightforward, naive honesty to her. Helaena sees the world differently to most people. She's not super interested in politics. Sometimes it seems like she's not fully, like, aware of, like, other people's perspectives in some ways. But she says very honestly and very directly that, like, I feel sad that my son was just murdered. But she thinks, well, maybe I shouldn't feel sad because lots of people lose their babies, and she has sympathy for the common folk. She has this quite logical perspective on the loss of her son, but she nonetheless feels horrible about it. So it's really interesting seeing her sort of, like, logically approach compassion and sympathy like this. And she asks how Alicent feels, and Alicent says that she's more worried about Helaena. And ultimately, Helaena says to Alicent, I forgive you. And it's so heartbreaking because this is the first time that Helaena has really, like, blamed Alicent. Like, Alicent has done some horrible things to Helaena. Like, it's largely because of Alicent that Helaena married her horrible rapist brother, Aegon. And Helaena talked last season about how it sucks being married to Aegon, and he mostly leaves me alone except for when he's drunk. Like, oh god, like what has Helena suffered under her brother husband Aegon? And of course, crowning Helena as the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms is not something that she ever wanted and puts her in a lot more danger. And now she's suffered the murder of her son Jaehaerys in front of her. Helena has suffered all of this trauma as a result of the political position that her mother Alicent and her grandfather Otto pushed her into. And she never really talked about that until now. Like, until now, we've never seen Helena, like, getting angry. We've never seen her, like, yelling at Alicent, saying, look at what you did to me. But now she has this sort of moment of insight and self-expression, and she doesn't even say, like, I hate you for what you've done to me. She just says, I forgive you for what you've done to me, which is somehow so much worse, so much more heartbreaking. It just cuts right to that. It's an opposite reaction to, like, Aegon and Aemond. Like, Aegon has complained to what Alicent has done to him, but Helena has this totally opposite perspective, and somehow it's just even more disarming. So I think this is really heartbreaking. Like, Alicent is shocked. Alicent says, what? Like, it's like Alicent doesn't even... Alicent chose to believe that Helena was not angry. Alicent chose to believe that Helena wasn't even aware of, like, all the political implications and machinations that Alicent has done. But no, like, Helena sees. Helena understands. Helena sees the truth. And Helena feels. And so it's this great moment of insight into Helena. And it's so heartbreaking that she has to forgive her mother for what she's done. And Alicent sees that. And it's heartbreaking. Thanks for the donation from Sticky Mass, who says, do you think that Rhaena will run into Laenor when she arrives in Essos? So yeah, Rhaena is going to Reggio in Pentos. We don't know where Laenor is. Like, last time we saw Laenor, he was rowing east, and he was going to cross the Narrow Sea, and he was going to try and live free in Essos. We don't know where Laenor is. He could be in Yi Ti, for all we know. I suppose it's possible that he's in Pentos. It would be really interesting if Rhaena got to meet her uncle Laenor, brother of her mother Laena. That would be interesting. We shall find out. So, Aegon puts on the armor of Aegon the Conqueror. He does not seem worthy of it. Aegon the Conqueror was the one who took over Westeros, forged the Targaryen dynasty with his sister wives Visenya and Rhaenys. And it's pretty sick to see some Valyrian steel armor, not gonna lie. Like, Valyrian steel is super valuable because no one knows how to make it anymore. The secret of making Valyrian steel was lost in the Doom of Valyria. And so all the Valyrian steel that remains is super, super valuable. And there's, like, some swords made of Valyrian steel, like Ice and Longclaw and Blackfire and Widow's Wail and such. And there's... In Hot D, Daemon has a helmet that apparently is made of Valyrian steel. And now we see, for the first time on screen, a suit of Valyrian steel armor. I do wonder, because in the books, Euron Greyjoy has a suit of Valyrian steel armor. Here it is illustrated by Mike Halstein. And this is revealed in one of the sample chapters for The Winds of Winter, so it might not be like 100% canon necessarily, but George Martin did write about Euron having a Valyrian steel suit of armor. And when Aeron Greyjoy, his brother, sees it, he's like, oh, damn, Euron is legit. Like, because Euron claims to have been to Valyria, and Euron claims to have all these great experiences and power, and some characters, like Roderick the Reader, say that Euron is full of shit and he's lying. But when Aeron sees that Euron has Valyrian steel armor, it's like, oh my god, he has been to the ruins of Valyria. He has acquired magics and secrets and incalculably valuable treasures. Oh, he's legit. And I wonder if this suit of Euron's Valyrian steel armor might be the same suit of armor that was worn by Aegon the Conqueror and is being worn by Aegon right now. Maybe it's the same suit of armor, because we haven't heard of any other Valyrian steel suit of armor. More valuable than a castle, as they say in this episode. So, Aegon has the name of Aegon Targaryen the Conqueror. He has the crown of Aegon the Conqueror. He has the sword, Blackfire, of Aegon the Conqueror. Much of Aegon's legitimacy as a king comes from trying to frame himself as the inheritor of Aegon's legacy, and so the armor is part of that. And you really just get the sense that Aegon is not worthy of the Conqueror's armor. Aegon is not worthy of the name, and he kind of knows it. Inside the episode, the actor Tom Glencarney says that Aegon is feeling like a fraud. And so I think that's why he ultimately chooses to not ride into battle on Sunfire, as he claims that he plans to do. I mean, partly that's just cowardice as well, I'm sure. I mean, Aemond is the one who studied the blade and studied philosophy. Aemond, I'm sure, is pretty qualified to go into battle. I don't think Aegon is. And so he's sort of admitting that to himself in this scene a bit. Larys has a fun scene where he sort of intimidates Red Ned Waters by saying that, oh, it would be a real shame if our king got his body parts scattered to beasts and his court come to ruin. Like, I guess Larys is sort of reminding Red Ned that, you know, everything you are depends on King Aegon succeeding. Because it's a surprise that Red Ned Waters and Leon Estamont and Martin Rain are now in the Kingsguard. That is a new addition to the Kingsguard after the death of Arik Cargill and after Harold Westerling leaving and Eric going over to the Blacks. And there's a bunch of Kingsguard who have left. So Aegon now gets his complement of Kingsguard up to 7 now by instating Leon, Martin, and Red Ned, who don't seem particularly qualified as Kingsguard. Like, we see them lounging on the stairs earlier, and they laugh at the idea of keeping their oath of chastity. These guys are not legit enough to be Kingsguard, but Aegon has just made them Kingsguard because they're his friends. And that's one of the problems in the main Game of Thrones storyline, when Robert Baratheon puts these people on his Kingsguard, like Mandon Moore and Boros Blunt, and all these, like, rando dudes who are really not qualified. They're not powerful enough in combat. They're not honorable or ethical enough. But they were put there for some BS political reasons, and they make King Robert weaker as a result. And, you know, I don't know. I don't think Red Ned and Martin and Leon wanted this for themselves either. Because, you know, by becoming Kingsguard, they have given their lives up. They are sworn to stand outside King Aegon's door for the rest of their lives. Never have sex, never have lands, never have wives. That sucks. And they're so young as well. So it's like, it's just another, like, impulsive, dumb decision by Aegon, apparently. Aegon didn't even tell the Lord Commander Criston that he had added 3 new members of his Kingsguard. Aegon has just changed half the Kingsguard and didn't even ask the commander of that Kingsguard. So Aegon is continuing to make shitty, impulsive decisions that benefit no one. And so Larys hears that Aegon is apparently intending to fly into battle on his dragon. And Larys comes along and says, oh, well, I heard that some people are saying that you are being tricked into flying to war so that Alicent and Aemond will rule for you. They're stealing your power, so really you shouldn't fly off into battle, Aegon. And Aegon is like, oh yeah, great point, Larys. I guess I better not risk my life and fly into battle. I guess I better stay home and watch Netflix. Larys is kind of telling Aegon what he wants to hear, I think, here. But it's kind of interesting. Larys says, oh, you know, some people say that you're being exploited and you're weak, which is like, okay, who is saying that, Larys? Is Larys spreading these rumors? Who is spreading this idea? And so ultimately Aegon decides to make Larys his Master of Whisperers. Larys's job title previously was Lord Confessor, the official torturer. But he decides to make him the Master of Whisperers, which is the official spy master, which does seem to be what Larys was practically doing already. Larys was already informing Alicent and Otto, so just formalizing what was kind of already the case. And you get the sense that this is what Larys kind of wanted all along, and now he's got it. I think being Master of Whisperers will entitle Larys to a seat at the Green Council, so he'll actually be a part of those conversations in government from now on, which will be interesting. I mean, I don't know if he even wants to be, like, in the limelight that much. Like, he seems to enjoy just manipulating people from the shadows. Being the Master of Whisperers will put him a little bit more on stage, I think, which may or may not be what he wants. But we shall see how that plays out. So I think that, I think that part of why Laris wants Aegon to stay and not fly off into battle is because Laris knows that he can manipulate Aegon. So Aegon is a really useful puppet for him. It's pretty bloody useful having a king who you can influence. So I think that that's why Laris sort of pressures Aegon to stay. And Aegon deep down is afraid of riding into battle, and he knows that he ain't shit. So he kind of wanted to stay home anyway. So Laris continues to gain influence, and Aegon continues to doubt himself. We're seeing so many different emotional emotional angles to Aegon. Like, we've seen Aegon be furious and murderous. We've seen Aegon be vulnerable. We've seen Aegon be like happy and having fun drinking, whilst also bullying and demeaning people. We've seen Aegon be cruel. He's such a mess. He's such a chaotic whirlwind of insecurity, even more so than the other characters, which is wonderful to see. But maybe not the guy who should be on the throne, huh? Maybe not the guy who should be in charge here. And yet here he is because of Otto and Alicent. We see how Leon and Martin and Ned are just total yes men to Aegon. Like, whatever Aegon decides to do, they're like, oh yes, so clever, my liege. Your wisdom is incalculable as ever. They are not going to steer Aegon in a good direction by the looks of it. All they want to do is go and party. They decide that they want to go out and take their squire to go and have sex for the first time at a brothel, and they want to go and party. And Aegon's like, hey, you know that you've just sworn to never have sex again because you took the Kingsguard oath, right? I wonder if Martin and Leon and Red Ned know or suspect that their Lord Commander Kristen had sex with both Rhaenyra and Alicent. Maybe it's like a bit of a rumor that's going around. Maybe it's almost an open secret. It's a bit like the Night's Watch are sworn to chastity and never having sex in Game of Thrones, but they often do go and have sex with the sex workers in Molestown. So it's kind of an open secret that people don't actually keep the vow of chastity. Maybe there's a similar vibe arising here in the Red Keep with the Kingsguard. But I mean, generally the Kingsguard Oath of Chastity is taken more seriously than the Night's Watch Oath of Chastity usually. But because, yeah, there have been several Kingsguard who have been executed and tortured to death as a result of breaking the oath. So it remains to be seen how seriously these guys will take it and what the consequences of breaking it might be. Aegon seems to enjoy lording it over his Kingsguard, over his former friends. He gets some satisfaction over feeling superior to them. So, yeah, many layers to Aegon. Very, very hateable and a charismatic guy at the same time. Thanks for the super chat from Marcus, who says, great content, love your videos. Thank you, Marcus. If you would like to donate or ask a question, the best way to do it is with the Streamlabs link, which is in the video description below. But I appreciate all the donations very much, and I won't be able to answer every single donation and question that you have, but I will try to answer as many as I can, and I will answer most of them towards the end of the live stream. Also, remember to like and subscribe. We're doing these live streams every week. We're also doing weekly edited, scripted, explained videos each week. I will try to get this week's video out a bit sooner than the last couple of weeks, because the last couple of scripted videos have come out mere hours before the next episode, which is not ideal for anybody. And incidentally, shout out to my evil half-twin Alt-Schwift X, who has done 55 hours of exclusive videos talking about House of the Dragon and Jon Snow with Glidus, which you can watch at nebula.tv/AltSwiftX. If you sign up for Nebula, you can watch those. But don't encourage AltSwiftX, or else he might make more. What a disaster that would be. Okay. So, the boys go out on the town to paint it red. It seems like King's Landing... There's always amazing parties happening in King's Landing, apparently. I think that's the real tragedy of this war, is its potential impact on the King's Landing nightlife scene. You wouldn't want to have any of these amazing street parties ruined by any conflicts that might happen. Thanks for the donation from Jess, who says, been watching the videos on Nebula, loving them a lot. Thank you, Jess. Well, Swift, thanks you. So yeah, there's a party out on the town. We see someone like dropping a bag of money down from this window down to these women below. I wonder if is there like pickpocketing going on? Is this like a drug deal? Like what's going on? Like I really like the sort of scum and villainy vibe that we get in King's Landing. They've done a great job of showing us like the good and the bad of like the small folk experience out here in King's Landing. So we see this character, Ulf the White, or Ulf the Sot, depending on who you ask. He's called Ulf the White for the color of his hair. His hair, I think, is a bit more white-colored in the books. And he's called Ulf the Sot because he's a drunkard, he's an alcoholic, and he's a raconteur, and he's a party boy. And I love this introduction where he seems to know everyone. Like, he's just mates with everyone. So he's got this fun, charismatic introduction. We did see Ulf the White in the previous episode. He saw the hanged rat catchers, and he also stole some food from someone. I wonder if Ulf has a job, or if he just steals food and gets free drinks at the pub. So Ulf walks up to some of his friends in the pub, and he says, "Oh, well, I couldn't possibly talk, but if you give me a drink, I will tell you some big goss. I will tell you that I'm a Targaryen bastard." But we'll get to that, because first, we see Diana. So Diana, we saw back in the previous season. Diana was... is it Diana? I think it's Diana. What's her name? Allison and... Yeah, Diana. So in Season 1, Episode 8, Diana was one of the serving girls, one of the maids who worked at the Red Keep. And we learned that Aegon raped Diana. And then we saw Diana horrified and traumatized and afraid because this ruins her life. Because it's a scandal for the king to have sex with a woman who he is not married to. And it's something that will affect the woman more than it'll affect the man, because she is at risk of being blamed, Alicent says, and they want to keep this secret, and they don't want any royal bastards being born, so she's made to drink this abortion moon tea potion, and she's given some money to shut her up, and she loses her job. She loses her job because Aegon raped her. And this is, probably one of the best possible jobs you could get as a common-born person, to work in the Red Keep with the royals. That's probably one of the best possible positions you could be in. And she loses it because of Aegon's assault. And so we saw how that affected Diana, and we saw how Alicent participated in covering it up, which is one of the really messed up angles of all of this, is that, Alicent is someone who herself suffered under, Viserys having sex with her when she didn't want to. And here she is covering up and participating in, like, the shitty patriarchal system that continues to assault and abuse women. While wearing her Faith of the Seven regalia. There's so many like layers of hypocrisy and horror here. And so we see that after being fired from the Red Keep, Diana is now working as a serving girl in this pub. And when this man gropes her, when he slaps her ass after giving her money, she looks terrified. And it's really understandable that she'd feel terrified, because last time someone touched her while she was at work, when Aegon assaulted her, that she ended up being raped by Aegon and then losing her job and then being traumatized. And so, from this guy, this guy Clay is like laughing at her and saying that she has no sense of fun, but here she is feeling horrified and traumatized by the potential consequences of this kind of quote unquote, harmless fun is actually harmful. So it is this really like small moment that I'm sure some viewers might not have recognized Diana here, but it's a nice way of showing the sort of ongoing consequences of Aegon's decisions. I mean, Aegon had forgotten Diana's name by the following morning after raping her, but Diana is still suffering the consequences of Aegon's behavior. So yeah, really interesting following up on that story with Diana. So Ulf tells his drinking buddies that, hey, by the way, I'm a royal bastard. So Ulf the White claims to be the bastard son of Balon Targaryen the Brave. Balon Targaryen is the father of Viserys and Daemon, and the grandfather of Rhaenyra and Aegon. So Ulf is just saying, hey, by the way, I got royal blood. I'm a dragon seed. So dragon seed is a word that refers to anyone who is a bastard of a Targaryen. The book talks about this happening on Dragonstone especially, which is where, Targaryens live. The Prince of Dragonstone lives on Dragonstone traditionally. And there's a long history of the Targaryens on Dragonstone having sex with common people and fathering various bastards. And the books say that the common people are really stoked about that. They really love having bastard children from the Targaryens. It's considered like a gift. The Targaryens are considered more closer to gods than to men, so it's meant to be this really great thing when a Targaryen has sex with you and gets you pregnant. Although opinions vary. I mean, Jaehaerys's wife, Queen Alysanne, had this whole campaign to ban the rite of first night. There used to be this old tradition where whenever a common person got married, the king would have the legal right to have sex with his bride before he does. A sort of institutionalized rape, which Alysanne found objectionable and so banned, although the tradition still continues in some places despite it being banned by Alysanne and Jaehaerys. So anyway, there's this whole sort of complicated history of Targaryens having sex with common people. There's all these bastards running around, and Ulf claims to be one of them. So what could that mean? You could say that a bastard of a royal Targaryen could arguably have a claim on the throne. I mean, there's this whole thing of the Blackfires, were a branch of Targaryen bastards who rebelled against the Targaryens for many years, for generations. There were 5 Blackfire rebellions. We've got a video about the Blackfire rebellions on Alt-Shift-X. So yeah, I mean, claim to the throne is a possible thing. I mean, bastards don't inherit generally. Bastards have less of a claim, but bastards can be legitimized by a king. And Daemon Blackfire was legitimized, and so he had a claim. If there was a situation where all of the legitimate Targaryens were dead, you would probably make a bastard the king. But another thing that might be relevant is that Targaryen blood can allow some people to ride dragons. And so that might be relevant here, but we shall see, won't we? Ulf says that he's a Targaryen bastard, and he says that he supports Rhaenyra as queen, despite the fact that he's in the city ruled by King Aegon. So it's a pretty dangerous thing to say. And just as he's saying that Rhaenyra is the rightful king and Jaehaerys, Jace, is the heir after Rhaenyra, none other than Aegon Targaryen walks in, out on the town with his mates. So Ulf came very close to doing treason in front of the king and being executed. But it's interesting that Ulf is like, he actually kind of cares politically. Like, he's not just saying, hey, I'm a Targaryen bastard. Like, he could have said, oh, I'm a Targaryen bastard, and yeah, I support Aegon, whatever. But Ulf actually seems to feel some sincere loyalty to Rhaenyra. And I wonder why he feels that way. I'm curious about why he's a fan of Rhaenyra and not of Aegon, given that he's living in Aegon's city. I mean, maybe it's because Ulf just saw all those rat catchers who were murdered by Aegon. Maybe that's what changed Ulf's mind. Maybe that's why he's now telling people about the fact that he's a Targaryen bastard. And yeah, this does indeed put Ulf in danger, because remember in Game of Thrones when Cersei went out and had a bunch of Robert Baratheon's bastards murdered. King Robert also had bastards, and that also is a political liability, because Robert's bastards could potentially make a claim on the throne, like Edric Storm and Gendry and Barra and all of them. So yeah, many dangerous implications of being a royal bastard. I mean, a bit like Jon Snow is a royal bastard of Rhaegar, allegedly. So, yeah, super interesting. Aegon rocks up, and he's with this squire who he wants to take to a brothel to get the squire to lose his virginity. And the squire does not seem very happy about that. It's kind of a downer. And we're reminded that Aegon did the same thing once to Aemond. We're told that when Aemond was just 13 years old, Aegon took Aemond to a brothel, and he lost his virginity, apparently to Sylvie, the older woman who he is now having sex with. And it is obviously many layers of messed up that Aemond had sex with a grown-ass woman when he was 13 years old. And Aegon, at the brothel, finds Aemond with Sylvie. And Aemond has this really sort of, vulnerable relationship with Sylvie. This really tender, incestuous, messed up relationship. And Aegon like makes fun of Aemond to his face, which, you know, continues the cycle of Aemond being bullied. Like, remember in season 1, we saw Aemond being bullied by Aegon, and he was saying last episode how he feels cut up about that still. And so, you know, Aemond is so vulnerable and raw still. And yet, when he gets bullied by Aegon here, Aemond eventually just stands up and leaves, and he says, "Oh, whatever, you can take Sylvie. One whore is as good as another." So it's kind of heartbreaking that, you know, Aemond does have this real connection to Sylvie. There seems to be some real affection between Aemond and Sylvie, but Aemond disrespects Sylvie in front of everyone to save face, which is really sad. Aemond is continuing to like put up this like performance of being a strong, tough guy who's not afraid of anything, when really just below the surface he's so vulnerable, and it's sad that he can't seem to show that vulnerability to anyone other than Sylvie. So, and you know, it's also a problem that the relationship between King Aegon and Prince Aemond is so fraught. I mean, if Aegon had half a brain cell, he would be trying to build a better relationship with Aemond. I mean, Aemond controls the world's biggest nuke lizard, Vhagar. Like, it's kind of important for Aemond to be on your side, but here he is mocking Aemond, which seems like a really terrible idea. And yes, on his way out, Aemond does indeed hang Dong, which is thrilling stuff for all involved. Thanks for the super chat from Bumper Dump, who says, "Do you think Aegon was just drunk when he humiliated Aemond, or was this a petty emotional reaction to the rumors uncovered by Larys?" It did look to me as though Aegon was drunk, which, you know, doesn't make it any better or worse what he said, I think. But yeah, you make a good point that I think Larys was saying that, oh, you know, they want you to fly away so that the others can control King's Landing. Like, maybe Aegon is I think it's a fact that Aegon is insecure about Aemond being a better prince than him, and more qualified, and a better warrior, and a better dragon. And so I think Aegon feels the need to humiliate Aemond because Aegon is insecure about Aemond being potentially stronger, better, wiser, more worthy of rule than him. But yeah, like, deepening that rivalry between the king and the prince in the middle of a war, pretty shockingly bad decisions by Aegon all around, I would say. So Rhaenyra cries over the toys of her children that she just parted ways with. She sent Aegon and Viserys and Joffrey, her youngest sons, off to stay in the Eyrie and in Pentos, and she doesn't know when she'll get to see them again, if ever. So she's crying over their toys. Thanks for the super chat from Raphael, who says, "I didn't understand why Rhaena and the kids were sent to Pentos, not the Eyrie. Did I miss something?" So Rhaenyra wants to keep her youngest kids safe, and Dragonstone is obviously not safe because Arik almost murdered Rhaenyra here last episode. So she wants to send them to safety. She sends Joffrey and Joffrey's little dragon Tyraxes to the Vale, to the Eyrie, ruled by Jane Arryn, because Rhaenyra did promise to give Jane a dragon to protect the Vale. But that doesn't mean that the Vale and the Eyrie is necessarily the safest place in the world. I mean, we know that the Vale and the Eyrie can be taken by dragons. Aegon the Conqueror took the Eyrie by sending his sister wife Visenya with the dragon Vhagar. And Vhagar is now controlled by Aemond. We know that Vhagar can just land on the Eyrie and take over the Vale. So the Vale is not really all that safe, necessarily. And I think Rhaenyra knows that. So her most young and vulnerable children, little Aegon and little Viserys, she hopes to send them to Pentos with Regio Horatus, because it's in Essos, it's far away, and hopefully the Greens won't be able to attack Aegon and Viserys over there. So that is why Rhaenyra sent Rhaena along with Aegon and Viserys to go to Pentos, while sending Joffrey and Tyraxes to the Eyrie. So yeah, I mentioned that in the Inside the Episode, Emma Darcy talked about like consciously giving up her like role as a mother so that she can focus on her role being a queen during a war, because it seems that those two roles are incompatible. She can't seem to be allowed to do both at once, and so she's processing that here. And she has a cute little box with some keepsakes, and it includes a letter from Alicent Hightower. Rhaenyra received this letter from Alicent a while ago, but it's she's refused to open it, which I think shows how sort of deep and tender Rhaenyra's feelings about Alicent are. I mean, Rhaenyra and Alicent were like best friends. There were almost romantic undertones between their relationship while they were growing up, and Rhaenyra feels deeply, deeply betrayed that Alicent supports Aegon instead of Rhaenyra as the ruler, because it's such a deep emotional need for Rhaenyra to feel Viserys, her father's approval and affection, and being Viserys's heir is the approval of her father that she always wanted, and Alicent stole that from her. So that's the emotion that's going on here. And so I think Rhaenyra is almost afraid to read Alicent's letter, because it's like, as long as she doesn't open the letter, then maybe their relationship is what she wants it to be, you know? But if she opens the letter and Alicent's like, screw you, I ordered Arik to kill you, nah, 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 that would be heartbreaking to Rhaenyra. And so I think that's part of why Rhaenyra is almost afraid to talk to Alicent and communicate to Alicent. Her feelings are just so tender and hurt. And so we don't get to see much of the letter. What does it say? Rhaenyra, I was something, lost the something, battling all the house something, might also wish to something to the mother. That's probably the god, the mother, praying to the mother. A lot of something something. And then later, Rhaenyra says that Alicent expressed remorse. So I guess Alicent in this letter said, hey, sorry about Arik trying to kill you, that wasn't me. Sorry about the death of Luke, that wasn't me. I guess that's what the letter is saying. But it probably wasn't too reconciliatory, because later in this episode, Alicent says it's too late to make peace. So I would be really interested to learn more about the contents of this letter. But Rhaenyra at least reads it, and she goes, okay, like, I guess it's worth trying to make peace with Rhaenyra. And so Rhaenyra gradually comes around, and she's like, okay, I've got to make one last attempt to make peace. So then we cut to somewhere in the Crown Lands. Criston and Gwaine Hightower and their army are marching to attack the rebel houses in the Crown Lands who support Rhaenyra. And Criston is focused on the military mission, while Gwaine Hightower is focused on getting a palmy and a pint at the pub. He wants to go to a pub and get drunk and sleep comfortably. That's his priority. Gwaine is a privileged guy. He grew up as part of the rich noble family, House Hightower, in Old Town, which is one of the nicest cities in Westeros. He's used to a certain lifestyle. I mean, look at this Oblivion horse armor DLC that he's wearing. That is some fancy horse armor. This guy knows how to live. But Criston is here saying, no, we're at a war, Gwaine. We need to focus on the mission. So Criston ignores Gwaine's prattling entirely and looks up, and he sees the dragon Moondancer in the sky. Because Baela was instructed by Rhaenyra to keep an eye out on movements around King's Landing on her little dragon Moondancer. And Baela sees Criston and goes, oh yeah, I'll have some of that. Rhaenyra told Baela, hey, stay safe. Don't fly down low. Just stay safe up high where you can't be hurt. But Baela seems eager to prove herself, eager to strike at her enemies, and so Baela swoops down on Moondancer, and she pursues Criston Cole and Gwaine and their men. Moondancer is looking pretty sweet, not gonna lie. Moondancer is bigger and older at this point in the show, whereas in the books, Moondancer is much smaller and younger. This is a scene that is not in the books. But Moondancer almost reaches Criston and Gwaine before they get under tree cover. I wonder what Baela's plan was here. Was Baela going to kill Criston? That would be a dangerous escalation of the war. At this point, Baela doesn't know that the Battle of the Burning Mill happened. So it would be a pretty significant escalation if Baela killed Criston or Gwaine. I don't know if she has like the authority to do that. I don't think Rhaenyra would want her to do that. Thanks for the donation from Jess, who says that in this situation, she kind of acts like Daemon. Yeah, I mean, let's not forget that Baela and Rhaena are the daughters of Daemon Targaryen, and Daemon is an impulsive and fiery and violent guy. And so, yeah, I agree. I think we see some of that with Baela and Rhaena. I think that part of why Rhaenyra told Baela to go out on a dragon to scout is because Rhaenyra trusts or hopes that Baela will be a bit more responsible than Jace might be. Like, Rhaenyra knows that Jace is pretty keen to join the war, and that Jace is keen to avenge his brother Luke. I think Rhaenyra was hoping that Baela would be less impulsive, but here Baela is swooping at the enemy hand of the king. Which, you know, of course, it would probably be... The world would probably be better off if Moondancer ate Criston Cole. Let's be honest. That would probably be better for everyone. But Baela is going beyond what Rhaenyra wanted her to do here. So Criston basically saves Gwain's life by warning them about the dragon. And Gwain says, a good showing, sir, fellow. Oh, yes, I'm glad we evaded that lizard with your forthright deduction of lizard movements. And Criston's like, yeah, whatever. New strategy. We're staying under the trees. So I just love their dynamic. Like, they are perfect foils for each other. Because Gwain is this, like, arrogant, highborn douchebag. And Criston is this focused, scary, violent dude who's trying to do his duty and do the mission and spill some blood. So they're kind of opposites, and I enjoy their dynamic, and I wonder how they will continue on. We don't know much about Gwain Hightower in the books. It mentions... Oh, well, we did see Gwain in Season 1, Episode 1, actually, played by a different actor, but this was Gwain with the fun chess piece helmet here. And in the show, Gwain jousted against Daemon Targaryen and was knocked off his horse. I think Daemon broke the rules because Daemon hit Gwain's horse with his jousting stick. There's definitely a word for that. Lance? He hits the horse and trips it up, and so I think that he beats Gwain unfairly. And Daemon chose to joust Gwain specifically because Gwain is the son of Otto, and Daemon wanted to piss off Otto. I believe in the books it was instead Criston who jousted against Gwain and unhorsed Gwain, which would add another element of resentment between them in the show, but anyway. So, yeah, Gwain is Otto's son and Alicent's brother, and he's here to support his family in their war. And it seems that only now is Gwain realizing that this war thing might be a little bit dangerous. What with all the dragons? In one of the trailers we see Gwain a bit bloodied in a battle, looking up, looking afraid. So I wonder if Gwain will have a bit of an arc of realizing, maybe war is not a fun thing to be involved in. And I think that may be a realization that much of Westeros comes to throughout this story. Maybe war is not great. So we return to the Black Council, and we learn that the Blacks have now learned that the Greens are on the march. Baela has seen Criston and Gwain and their army, and so now Rhaenyra's counselors, these black counselors, are saying, hey, like, we really, really, really need to, like, get our soldiers in the field. We need to get our dragons to burn the enemy soldiers because the enemy is marching to attack us. We need to do something about that. The time for action is surely now, says Bartimus. This guy here is Lord Simon Staunton. He rules one of those little Crown Lands houses. He's over here, House Staunton. So Simon Staunton wants to go back to Rook's Rest to defend his castle from Criston's army. Because most of these counselors that Rhaenyra has on Dragonstone are lords of the Crown Lands. Like Bartimus Celtigar is from Claw Isle over here. Lord Massey is here. So these are the people who are advising her are the people who are most at threat from the Greens. So it makes sense that they are eager to defend their lands. But Rhaenyra, despite Alfred Broom's entreaties, wants to stay patient. Because Rhaenyra is thinking, like, hey, like, war would be really bad. Like Rhaenys told her, war between dragons would be really bad. She's already lost one son, Luke. things are dangerous, and she knows about Aegon's dream, the prophecy that Viserys told her about. She's taking that seriously, and if she can prevent thousands of people from being murdered, she has to try. So she's trying to do the ethical thing. But from the perspective of her counselors, she's just being a coward, or she's being weak, or she doesn't get it. She's a girl, so she doesn't understand war. What's that line in the books? Daenerys says, "I am but a young girl and know little of the ways of war." Kind of that energy. So the counselors are frustrated with her, and it's like, damn, like, if Rhaenyra keeps delaying, are these counselors going to listen to her? I mean, something to keep in mind is that these counselors aren't all that important. Like, the lords of bloody Staunton and Celtigar and Massey, these are minor houses. You could argue that Rhaenyra doesn't need these people, really, because Rhaenyra does have the support of Lord Cregan Stark and Lady Jane Arryn, who rule entire kingdoms. Like, those people are way more powerful, but they are far away in the north, and they're not much use to Rhaenyra just yet. So, distance is an enemy, I suppose. But yeah, I agree, Paigey, in the live chat. Rhaenyra doesn't need these minor lords all that much, really. She could have someone else. So she says, "Yep, I will take your advice under advisement," which is like, okay, like that's not giving the counselors any more faith in her. But Rhaenys, I think, seems to think that Rhaenyra is at least trying to do the right thing. That, look, there will probably be a war no matter what we do, but it's worth a try. And again, it's interesting seeing Jace watching this. Like, how does Jace feel about this? It seems as though Jace would really like to get in on the war, but at least for now, he is obeying and respecting his mother's wishes to wait. Thanks for the super chat from Lobi, who says, "It's funny how everyone talks casually about sending dragons places to do things. Dragons are directly compared to swords. No one fully understands the power of a dragon, even the Targaryens." Yeah, well, remember in Season 1, when Viserys was saying, dragons are a power that we cannot control. We should never have trifled with dragons. Viserys rode the greatest dragon of all, Balerion the Black Dread, and so he would know about the power of dragons. And we don't know what Viserys knows. We don't know what Viserys' experience with Balerion was like, but he was saying that, yeah, dragons are too dangerous. We should not use them. And we saw that when Aemond and Vhagar killed Luke. Aemond was not in control of Vhagar when that happened. And we see in the Game of Thrones books that Daenerys struggles to control Drogon. So there are very good reasons to not unleash dragons. I mean, dragons also tend to lead to friendly fire. Like we saw Caraxes stomping on one of his own men on the stepstones, and we saw Rhaenys and Meleys killing like hundreds of innocent people at the dragon pit. It's good to not bring the nuclear lizards to war, so that makes sense. All right, we're back to Harrenhal. Let's talk about the visions. There's a weirwood tree outside Harrenhal. I'm very curious to know how that weirwood tree was not roasted by Aegon's dragon Balerion when Harrenhal was burned. But there it is. There is magic power here at Harrenhal. There's also very poor roofing. I suppose it does make a lot of sense that after this castle was burned and half melted by Balerion the Black Dread, I guess the gutters and the roofing and the hydrological situation leaves something to be desired. So it's so funny that Daemon came here for a war. Daemon came here for a glorious battle to let out his marital frustrations through bloodshed. And here he is, like, trying to get to sleep under a leaky roof. This is not what he had in mind. He sees behind his window there's, like, candlelight and someone's knocking at his door, but when he goes through the door, there's no one there. And the candlelight is gone as well. I wonder if this was Alice Rivers or someone else knocking at his door, or if this is entirely part of the vision. The showrunners say that Daemon is not sure what's real and what's imaginary. We get another shot of the weirwood roots here, reminding us that the magic power of the old gods and the weirwoods are perhaps causing these visions. And so Daemon has this crazy vision, and he goes into this room, and it's Millie Alcock again. It is young Rhaenyra Targaryen, played by Millie Alcock. And Rhaenyra says, "You're always running off, and I have to clean up afterwards." And then we see tears in Daemon's eyes. So I think that this is Daemon's guilt, right? Like, Daemon has totally screwed Rhaenyra around. Like, Daemon groomed Rhaenyra when she was a teenager. He took her to a sex club and then caused her to be seen there, and that kind of caused the rift between Alicent and Rhaenyra. Like Daemon got this teenager drunk, took off her hat so that her Targaryen hair would be recognized, took her to a sex club, and then dumped her there. And that was what Rhaenyra had to cover up with her lie to Alicent, which gets referenced in a later scene. And so it's largely Daemon's fault. I mean, Daemon taking Rhaenyra to the sex club and getting her drunk also led to Rhaenyra having sex with Criston. I mean, Rhaenyra also made a decision there, but yeah, I mean, that is just one example of Daemon messing Rhaenyra around. I mean, Daemon more recently murdered Jaehaerys, which has created a massive political headache for Rhaenyra. And Daemon over and over again creates these problems and then refuses to deal with the consequences. And it's left to Rhaenyra and to Viserys and to everyone else to deal with the consequences of Daemon's actions. And so I think by looking backwards, looking to the past, Daemon is actually kind of confronting and feeling like, oh, I may have gone a bit too far in a few places. And it's a really interesting moment of introspection. He sees not only young Rhaenyra, he also sees the headless corpse of Jaehaerys. So maybe Daemon does have a heart somewhere, and maybe Daemon does feel guilty for murdering a child. So, yeah, dark stuff. And it continues, like, in the books, lots of people have visions and dreams. Viserys, of course, had dreams of the future. Viserys dreamed that his son would be on the throne, and all the dragons would roar as one. And now Daemon is having kooky dreams. And then he wakes up outside the Weirwood tree in Harrenhal. I love seeing this uncertainty from Daemon. Daemon is someone who craves control, who craves to feel like he's his own master. But here he is at the whim of forces that he doesn't understand. So I love this vulnerability from the usually confident Daemon. And so he wakes up by the Weirwood tree, and then he turns around and he sees Alice Rivers, the mysterious witch of Harrenhal. And Alice Rivers says, "You will die in this place." Oh boy, will Daemon die at Harrenhal? The pattern with prophecies in this world is usually that the prophecies come true, but like not in the way that you expect. That's particularly obvious in like the Dunk and Egg stories. There's all sorts of metaphors, like dreams and visions and predictions are often misinterpreted. But yeah, Alice says that Daemon will die here. Will Daemon ever leave Harrenhal? What's going to happen? Or is Alice just messing with him? It's sort of ambiguous. Like, is Alice causing Daemon to have these dreams? Like, is Alice a Greenseer? Is she connected to the magic Weirwoods? Is she a goddamn child of the forest in disguise? Is Alice Rivers Leaf? Leaf is the child of the forest in the Game of Thrones books who apparently has lived for hundreds of years and has spent time wandering Westeros. Maybe Leaf in magic disguise is Alice. Maybe Alice is Melisandre wearing a glamour to appear younger, because in the books Alice is older than she appears. Many, many, many mysteries about Alice Rivers, and I'm sure we will see more of her soon. But yeah, she is a very cool character, and Daemon is totally discombobulated by her and this magic. I'm very curious to see where this goes. Thanks for the super chat from Fits of Passion, who says, "I think that Harrenhal is full of psychedelic mushrooms from all the damp, and that's how Alice Rivers gives people visions." Maybe. The Weirwoods are very strange plants. I think there's this wild theory that all of the Weirwood trees in Westeros are actually one organism, all interconnected by some deep system of roots that run underground, like some interconnected network. In the books, the Weirwoods are host to the souls of the dead. Like, when people die, their souls go into the Weirwoods. At least Skin Changers and Greenseers' souls do. And so Weirwoods are like these hard drives that contain all the memories, all the knowledge of thousands of years of Greenseers. And when the children of the forest die, they go into the trees and they are remembered. And it seems as though the old gods have a will of their own to some extent. Like, they live and they desire things, and there is a darkness to that. In a lot of George R. R. Martin's older stories, there are sinister, alien hive minds that swallow people up, and so it's not really clear if the old gods are a good thing or not. The old gods do seem to take blood sacrifice, like the ancient worshippers of the old gods would like hang the entrails of their enemies in the weirwood trees, and the blood would feed the weirwoods. Even Ned Stark cleans the blood off his sword at the weirwood tree, so the blood goes to the weirwood tree. There is a definite darkness to that magic, and it's associated with the children of the forest more closely than with humans. It's an inhuman magic. It's connected to nature more than it's connected to humans. And there are all these theories about how the pact thousands of years ago on the Isle of Faces, which we saw this episode, may have been more about the old gods controlling humanity than any kind of like peace of equality. And there are theories about, Bran becoming king at the end of Game of Thrones might be something very sinister, if that's what happens in the books. It might be something where it's the magic of the old gods, and it's the vengeful spirits of nature reclaiming the land from humanity and like displacing humanity and using Bran as a puppet. So there's definite darkness here. I wonder if the old gods and the weirwoods here are angry about the burning of Harrenhal. I mean, surely there would have been... Well, it's complicated because, like, Harrenhal, who built Harrenhal, he cut down a lot of ancient weirwood trees in order to use the timber to build Harrenhal. So Harren sort of committed a crime against the weirwoods and the old gods, and I wonder if the weirwoods and the old gods were angry at Harren and angry at Harrenhal, and I wonder if that's part of the nasty, dark, angry magic energy here, I also wonder what the connection is between Aegon Targaryen and the weirwoods, because Aegon had these dreams of the White Walkers, which were possibly created by the Children of the Forest using the magic of the old gods. What did Aegon have any understanding of what the old gods and the weirwoods are? Lots of really interesting open questions. The weirwoods are like dead trees, essentially. Like, their bark is bone white and their leaves are blood red. They're like zombie trees. There are theories that, like, their life needs to be returned to them. The weirwoods are wrong and they need to be fixed. All sorts of crazy theories. So yeah, Daemon is shaken by these spooky, trippy visions. And so are we. So, Rhaenyra decides that she needs to try and talk to Alicent to avert war. So she talks to Melisandre, who's chatting with Alinda Massey here. I wonder if Mysaria is gaining intel from Alinda Massey, because Mysaria, she has spies. She likes to learn information. That is her trade. So I wonder if she's trying to get some information here. And Rhaenyra says, "Hey, I want you to arrange a conversation between me and Alicent." And Myzaria's like, "Hey, you know that she's the queen, right? Like, the enemy. Like, that's going to be difficult." And Mysaria says that, well, it would be a lot easier to just kill her. And Rhaenyra says no. Maybe Rhaenyra should say, "Hey, Mysaria, can you, like, kill Aegon for me? Like, if you can kill little Jaehaerys, surely you can help me kill Aegon." But no, Rhaenyra is trying to find a peaceful path. And Mysaria says, "I think the best way to do that is to go to church. If you get disguised, you can infiltrate King's Landing and talk to Alicent." And so that's what they do. She goes to King's Landing, she gets into the city in disguise, and she goes to the Sept. She is protected here by Steffon Darklyn, who is one of her Kingsguard. Maybe a bad idea to bring two recognizable faces into the heart of enemy territory, but that's what they do. This is not in the books, incidentally. This is made up for the show. And it's quite funny to see Rhaenyra in the garb of a scepter, because Rhaenyra doesn't follow the faith of the Seven. I mean, when she infiltrates the Sept and she sits next to Alicent, Alicent looks kind of like horrified seeing Rhaenyra dressed up like a scepter. Like, it's almost offensive, right? Because Alicent knows that Rhaenyra doesn't believe in the faith of the Seven. She's pretending to be a scepter. It's like dressing up in someone else's sacred religious garb. It's a little messed up. Like, Rhaenyra's intruding in Alicent's sacred space where she prays to her mother. But hey, Rhaenyra's trying to prevent a war, so she's doing what's necessary. Rhaenyra also pulls a knife on Alicent, which is a hell of a way to start a conversation. But it makes sense that Rhaenyra needs to, like, take precautions, because there's a very high likelihood that Rhaenyra is going to be captured and tortured and killed. Like, Rhaenyra knows that. This is a very high-risk maneuver. Rhaenyra is risking her life for the sake of preventing this war, so you gotta respect that, I suppose. And so they decide to chat, and they sort of threaten to kill each other, which, great way to start a diplomatic meeting. Do you think maybe Rhaenyra should have sent Alicent a letter first? But, Rhaenyra said earlier that if she tried to pre-arrange it, Alicent would just suspect that it's some kind of trick, so it's very tricky. Thanks for the super chat from Ethar, who says that the scene feels like a better version of Tyrion's shenanigans in Season 7. Yeah, I agree, because there's that whole bit in Season 7 where, Tyrion smuggles himself, or Davos smuggles him into the Red Keep so that he can talk to Jaime, and it is all... It does beg a belief a little bit that it's that easy to get in and out of the Red Keep. But it does make sense, Rhaenyra getting into this sept does seem a little easier to believe because it is just a church. I mean, I'm kind of surprised that Alicent's out here walking around undefended by, she's only got 2 Kingsguard next to her. It wouldn't be that hard to, pull out a crossbow and kill the queen, right? But I guess that also speaks to, Alicent is not considered all that valuable anymore. Aegon is the king now, and Alicent is not the queen. Helena is the queen. Alicent is merely the Queen Dowager, the Queen Mother. So maybe the lack of security shows Alicent's relative lack of importance here. So Rhaenyra says, hey, can we, prevent this war? And so Rhaenyra says, remember in Season 1, Episode 1, when we were at that tourney together, and remember when all those knights were just murdering each other? Remember how that was bad? Let's try and stop that from happening. Let's not let this war get worse. And Alicent's like, oh, so you've come to surrender? So Alicent is not very amenable to Rhaenyra's attempts to make peace. Alicent basically says it's too late. Rhaenyra complains that Alicent stole her throne, and Alicent says that no, Viserys changed his mind. Yes, Viserys originally wanted you to be his heir, but then he changed his mind. Because remember in episode 8 in season 1, Viserys' dying words, he mumbled about Aegon and the prince that was promised. And Alicent interpreted that as meaning that Viserys wanted his son Aegon to be king. But what Viserys actually was talking about was Aegon the Conqueror and his dream to unite Westeros against the White Walkers. Alicent misinterpreted that. And so now Rhaenyra gets to tell Alicent that and says hey, Viserys was not talking about his son Aegon, he was talking about Aegon the Conqueror. And Alicent has this oh shit moment where she's like, oh, I might have done a whoopsie. Maybe he was actually talking about the other Aegon Targaryen. Can you believe that this family keeps naming their kids Aegon? I mean, Rhaenyra has a son called Aegon. Alicent has a son called Aegon. The Conqueror was called Aegon. And there's 5 more Aegons further down the family tree later on. They gotta stop calling people Aegon. In Game of Thrones, Jon Snow's name is apparently Aegon Targaryen. They gotta stop doing it. It keeps causing wars. Anyway, so Alicent realizes, oh, I might have accidentally done a treason. I might have accidentally done a war. But remember that back in season 1, Otto was gonna crown Aegon regardless. As it turns out, Alicent's opinion didn't matter, and Otto and the Greens were gonna make Aegon the king regardless of what Alicent thought, regardless of what Viserys thought. So, it kind of maybe didn't have that much of a political impact, Alicent's opinion. But, I mean, it does certainly make Alicent realize that she might be in the wrong here. She may be on the wrong side of history. And despite that, Alicent says, well, this is what's happening anyway. There's going to be war anyway, because the army has left. Criston Cole is leading an army. And, my grandson Jaehaerys was killed, and your son Luke was killed, and Aemond lost an eye, and there already has been so much blood that the original fact of what Viserys did or did not want is now irrelevant. So it's exactly what Simon was saying and Rhaenys was saying with the Blackwoods and the Brackens. The original reason for this conflict has been forgotten. It's not even about anything anymore. It's just vengeance to avenge, vengeance to avenge, vengeance. Like dominoes, it's a burning mill. It's a burning mill, cycling and rotating, and it crushes us all. It's like the wheel that Daenerys talked about in season 5. The wheel that turns and crushes everybody. So Alicent leaves. Alicent says it's too late. I can't stop it. I don't have power anymore. The people are going to butcher each other, and there's nothing we can do. And she leaves. And then the wheel turns. Yeah, it's not just me. Like, the circle represents the cycle of violence, right? Look at it turn. Come on. So, Rhaenyra is heartbroken that she has failed to reconcile with her friend. She has failed to avert this war. It was too late. Too much blood has been spilled, and now it can't be undone. So Rhaenyra apparently risked her life for nothing. So that sucks. I also really like the line where Rhaenyra says to Alicent, Viserys' last words, did he talk about me? Like, I really like that, because it shows how Rhaenyra is still motivated largely by wanting approval from Viserys. Like, it's so funny that Viserys was, like, let's be honest, a pretty mediocre guy in a lot of ways. Like, Viserys' bad decisions created this conflict. Viserys was not a good father to Aegon and Aemond and Helena and Daron. And Viserys was not a good husband to Alicent. And Viserys was not a good king. And yet, Rhaenyra is still largely motivated by wanting her father's approval. Daemon is still largely motivated by wanting his brother Viserys' approval. You know, Alicent is justifying a lot of her actions by her misinterpretation of Viserys' wishes. I mean, you know, it's real. Sometimes people are obsessed with mediocre people. I mean, remember last episode when the dog was looking up at Cheese? When Cheese did not deserve the dog's loyalty, Cheese kicked the dog, and yet the dog still loved Cheese. It's kind of like how Rhaenyra feels about Viserys, and how Alicent feels about Viserys, and how Daemon feels about Viserys, and how Rhaenyra feels about Daemon. All of these people desperately seek approval from people who do not deserve their love. Really wonderful drama, I feel. Thanks for the donation from Nosum, who says, love your work. It would be crazy awesome if you made a collaborative live stream with Alt-Shift-X sometime. That would be interesting. Yeah, look, I don't get along with Alt-Shift-X, not after what he did to my ex, so it's really just, we're just trying to be civil by not being in the same room. But if Alt-Shift-X wants to be man enough to offer an apology for his various misdeeds, then I might consider talking to Alt-Shift-X. I have not collaborated with Alt-Shift-X, but you can watch 55 hours of Alt-Shift-X talking to Glidus about dragons. That link. Okay, anyway. So that's the end of the episode. It's a meditation on cycles of violence, and it's the realization that, it might be too late to avert war. Armies are on the march, dragons are loose, sons are dead. We've gone too far to back out now. So I suppose the question now is, like, are armies gonna murder each other until no one's left in Westeros? Or is someone gonna surrender? Or is a peace deal gonna be made? Or is Rhaenyra or Aegon gonna get assassinated? There's a lot of different ways this could go down. So we're 3 episodes in, and I think we are past the point of no return. I also very much enjoyed the Harrenhal spooky visions, lots of lore to talk about with the Harrenhals. I enjoyed our glimpse of the Brackens and the Blackwoods. I enjoyed Criston continuing to be a disaster for everybody, including himself. Mysaria continues to be intriguing. I liked deepening Rhaenyra's character. I'm curious what's going to happen to her on her mission east, and the various kids that she's safeguarding. Simon Strong was hilarious, and he perfectly encapsulated the absurdity and the tragedy of this war. The cycles of violence achieve nothing for no one, and Harrenhal is a testament to that. Harrenhal is a symbol of the disaster caused by man's hubris and man's violence, the pointlessness of trying to establish a legacy through spilling blood. I think it was a yeehaw good time for all involved. So, and we also met Ulf, who supposedly is a Targaryen bastard. Let's see how that plays out. Hashtag new Jon Snow, Ulf Snow. I'm now going to try to answer as many of your donations as I can. And then we're going to close up the live stream. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. please press like and subscribe. You can listen to these live streams as a audio podcast on the podcast app of your choice or on Spotify. Links are in the description. There is another podcast feed for the main Alt-Shift-X edited videos, which you can also listen to as an audio feed podcast for your convenience. Links in the description. And we will be making a scripted, edited House of the Dragon Season 2 Episode 3 explained video later this week, hopefully a bit sooner than the last couple of videos came out. Maybe if they don't get so long, maybe we can get them out a little bit quicker. All right, let's attempt to respond to some donations. Thank you, Nuisance, who says, Rhaenyra's self-conscious, I've begun badly, after pulling a knife on Alicent, cracked me up. It's a good example of contextually appropriate levity, as opposed to the later seasons of Game of Thrones. Yeah, no, I'm right there with you, Nuisance. I think that a lot of the humor in this show actually perfectly fits with the characters and the themes. Like, I agree that in Game of Thrones, like, every couple of scenes, they just broke the tone of the show to say something about dicks. You know, Bronn would talk about cocks, or Tyrion would talk about, haha, you have no balls. That was what Game of Thrones season 7 and 8 thought was humor. Whereas in this show, the characters make jokes that actually, like, fit with their characters and fit with the tone and the theme of the story. For example, when Simon Strong is like, oh yeah, well, it doesn't really matter who I swear loyalty to, but it does matter that our peas are overcooked. Because it's true. Like, this is a pointless conflict. It is a family fighting itself, and it is more important to actually enjoy life. Like, there is such a thread of that through the books. Like, George Martin constantly writes about food, and the point of living is to enjoy life and to eat good food and to love good people. The point is not to spill blood in the name of some king who you've never met. So I feel like Simon's humor, like mocking the absurdity of the chair made of swords, it perfectly fits the actual meaning of the story as well as being funny. So I agree. It's humor that's deployed in a really, like, fitting way that actually serves the story. Thank you, Stephen, who says, I feel the same frustration with Rhaenyra's hesitation to take action as I did with Dany in Season 7 and 8. Yeah, well, with Daenerys in the end of Game of Thrones, they sort of created this dichotomy where it's like, you can use your dragons to burn King's Landing and kill thousands and win, or you can faff about and hope that you can win the war with words. Which I always felt was like a bit of a false dichotomy, or at least they didn't establish that, like, conundrum well enough. Here in Hot D, it's like a little bit more complicated because, you know, if Rhaenyra is going to use dragons in this war, she has to put her children in danger, and she's already lost her son Luke, so it makes a lot of sense that she's worried about using her dragons. And also, you know, we've seen how dragonfire does tend to kill innocent people, so, you know, I hope that they're making that sort of paradox a bit more believable here. But yeah, there are other differences between Rhaenyra and Daenerys, which are going to be really important, right? Because we don't want Rhaenyra to just be Daenerys 2.0. Thank you, Shadow Humor, who says, we need an Aegon the Conqueror and Balerion flashback. Give us something to get excited about. Yeah, well, there is a show or a movie about Aegon the Conqueror in development. It may or may not happen. It's only in development, but that might happen. Thank you, John Braxton, who says, curse PayPal, made a Nebula account, and the content I have for my listening pleasure. Still digesting the last scene. Thank you, John. Thank you, Mujitaba, who says, do you think we will see the Cannibal? So the Cannibal is cool because he's a mysterious, nasty dragon who lives on Dragonstone and likes to eat other dragons. And he's fearsome and feared. And he might be useful in a war if someone is able to claim Cannibal, but it would be a tough prospect trying to do so. So, yeah, it remains to be seen if the Cannibal will be involved, but he's a scary fella. Thank you, Ayatas, who says love from India. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor McSizzle, who says, I was devastated by the 15 seconds that Rhaenyra was briefly convinced that Viserys didn't actually love her. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, so for a moment in the Sept, Alicent was saying, no, I swear, Viserys named Aegon heir instead of you. And yeah, that does break Rhaenyra's heart, because she always wanted Viserys' approval, and for a moment it's like, oh god, maybe he really didn't love me. But then Rhaenyra goes, oh, he was talking about Aegon the Conqueror. And I guess that's a little bit of motivated reasoning from Rhaenyra as well, in a way, you know? She wants to believe that Viserys was steadfastly supporting her, not Aegon. So, yeah, tragedy. Thank you, LightX, who says, is the man confronting Aeron Bracken at the start not Bloody Ben, like people speculated? I don't know exactly if we know the names of these Bracken and Blackwood characters. I think at one point you can Davos Blackwood. Apparently it's Davos Blackwood and Aeron Bracken, according to the subtitles. So, these are both new characters who aren't in the books. Whereas in the books, there are some different named Blackwood and Bracken characters who are involved in these fights. So maybe we will meet those other characters later on. We shall see. Thank you, Dennis, who says that Aegon on these guys is mental. Cirque says, so between the Greens and Blacks, how many Kingsguard are alive right now? More than 7? Yeah, there are more than 7 Kingsguard right now. I believe that the Greens have Lord Commander Criston Cole. They have Red Ned and Martin Rain and Leon Estamont. They used to have Arik, but he's dead. There's like someone called Glendon. There's someone called Rickard Thorne. There's someone called Willis Fell. So I believe that's 7, if my counting is correct. And then on Dragonstone, Rhaenyra has far fewer Kingsguard. She only has Stefan Darklyn and Laurent Marbrand. And now Eric is dead. So yeah, I think she only has 2 named Kingsguard that we are aware of. But yeah, maybe now that Aegon has got his Kingsguard to a full complement, maybe Rhaenyra will get some more Kingsguard herself. Maybe she'll call it a Queensguard. That would make sense. Thank you, Kat, who says that Brienne feeds a baby weirwood with Nimble Dick Crab. Yeah, there are various characters who get buried beneath weirwoods, feeding blood to the old gods. Teach says, have you accepted Daemon is a Night King? I don't know what you mean, but it is interesting that Daemon calls himself Your Grace, which is treason, basically. He is saying that I'm not just Rhaenyra's king consort, I am in fact the king, which suggests that he might be trying to take Rhaenyra's throne, which is a problem. Thank you, Laverne, who says, wouldn't the ship carrying Rhaenyra be sus? The gullet is blockaded. No ships should be reaching King's Landing. Yeah, well, I think the thing is that Dragonstone and Driftmark are within the gullet. If we have a look at the map. So the Velaryons are blockading the gullet, which is, like, here. Oh, yeah, okay. I guess Dragonstone is kind of outside the gullet. But I mean, the Velaryons are working for Rhaenyra, so I guess Rhaenyra can just get the Velaryons to let her through the gullet, and then she can proceed down Blackwater Bay to King's Landing. And they were saying this episode that King's Landing is being fed by like little fishing ships in Blackwater Bay, so there are lots of ships coming and going, so they can just blend in with them and not be too suspicious. So yeah, I don't know, seems believable enough to me that they could get a ship in there. There are lots of ships coming and going. Professor says, is Harrenhal looking small? It looked pretty big to me when Caraxes landed on Harrenhal. We got a nice swooping shot around the great towers of Harrenhal as Daemon was coming in. It looked pretty impressive to me. The towers have cute, spooky names in the Game of Thrones books. What are they called? They're called like the Widow's Tower and King's Pyre, which is like King Harren was burned in that tower, I suppose, is why that's called King's Pyre. It's a over-the-top spooky Halloween-y place. Thank you, Michael, who says, love your work. What was the significance of the redwood tree and the woman warning of Daemon's death? Yeah, well, I think we talked about that. I mean, the red-leaved tree is a weirwood tree, and the weirwood trees are connected to the magic of the old gods, and green seers like Bran can use the magic of the old gods to see across time and space, and Alice Rivers is a mysterious witch character who seems to maybe be connected to that magic. It's mysterious, it's ambiguous, but it appears that that magic caused Daemon to have these visions that explored his guilt for what he's done to Rhaenyra and to Jaehaerys. Lumpus says, I like that the hateable Kristen is portrayed as capable out in the field, even though he is an idiot in all other contexts. Yeah, I agree, Lumpus, because, it's not like Kristen is useless. Kristen is good at fighting, and he appears to know some things about, military strategy. In the right circumstances, Kristen could be a really great, helpful person. He could actually get things done. But unfortunately, Kristen has been put in the wrong job as the commander of the Kingsguard, as the hand of the king. He's not qualified to do that. And he's also ended up in this, horrifically twisted situation between Rhaenyra and Alicent, and breaking his oath and this deadly secret. I think you can imagine Kristen being in a situation where he is a positive influence on the world rather than a negative influence. Maybe everyone would be better off if Kristen stayed with the Dondarrions in the Stormlands. Varys says that it would be awkward if Rhaena bumped into Laenor and his boyfriend in Pentos. Yeah, I mean, maybe. Carl Corrie, Laenor's boyfriend, went east with him. Wouldn't it be interesting if we met Carl Corrie, if he returned? That would be cool. Carl Corrie was kind of framed for the murder of Laenor, actually, so I wonder if the Velaryons would be pissed at Carl. Because Rhaenyra told Rhaenys that she was not responsible for killing Laenor, but it's not clear if Rhaenys believes that, and it's also not clear if Corlys believes that Rhaenyra is innocent of killing Laenor, which, seems like kind of a big deal if you ask me, but hasn't really been resolved. Thank you, NM, who says, some people criticize the slow pacing of the show, but there's a lot of people you need to know on a first-name basis in order for the story to make sense. Benjicott Blackwood, Alice Rivers, Ulf the White, etc. Yeah, there are a lot of characters in this show. It's hard to keep track of them, and that's what Alt-Shift-X is for. So, yeah, it's not an easy challenge to, include all these characters. They've included, most of it. The book Fire and Blood is not detailed. It's a pretty, encyclopedic Cliff Notes summary of the events of this war. And the show has done a surprisingly good job of actually including the vast majority of the characters and the details. They've kept most of the names, even when half of the names are the same. So I think they are trying quite hard to be faithful to the lore. And that does perhaps make the show a little confusing, and it's got to cover a lot of ground. But I think they're doing a pretty good job. Thank you, Name, who says, did it look like Rhaenyra was suppressing a smile at the end? It looked like she was to me, and I interpreted that as relief that Papa V didn't disinherit her. Yeah, I mean, I guess Rhaenyra, there's so many emotions going on here. Rhaenyra is partly leaving this conversation with vindication, realizing that, so Alicent misunderstood Viserys. Alicent wrongly thought that Viserys wanted Aegon to be heir, but I really am the true chosen heir, and I really am in the right. I guess that's part of a positive emotion that Rhaenyra is getting from this. But Rhaenyra is also getting the horror and disappointment that my friend Alicent is saying that it's too late to be friends again, and I guess we're enemies, and I guess I'm going to have to go to war against my ex-best friend. And I guess I can't prevent thousands of people from dying. So, mixed emotions, I would say. Thank you, Kate Monster, and thank you, Artemis Rose, who says, since Otto has left and the death of Jaehaerys has divided the Greens, now could be the best opportunity for Rhaenyra to act, instead of keeping peace. I think that's a fair argument. I think right now, while everything's in disarray and the leadership of the Greens is weak, now's a pretty good time to attack and squash them. I mean, if Rhaenyra just sent, herself on Syrax, and, Daemon on Caraxes, and Rhaenys on Melis, and Jace on Vermax, and Baela on Moondancer, they could go to King's Landing, and maybe they'd have a good shot at taking it over. Vhagar would be a problem. Vhagar is the greatest weapon in this world. He's not going to be easy to kill. But I mean, Daemon seemed pretty gung-ho about it. Daemon seemed to think in episode 1 that he and Rhaenys and Caraxes and Melis could kill Vhagar. It might be worth a shot. But also there's those scorpions shooting bolts at King's Landing, which is a worry. And it would be difficult to have a dragon fight at King's Landing without getting a bunch of innocent people killed. So there's reasonable reasons to not want to go in there with the dragons blazing. Thank you, Sir Realism, who says, do you think Alicent's realization of her error will drive her mad? Yeah, well, I think Alicent definitely is shaken by realizing that, oh, I misinterpreted Viserys. I really, really should not have supported Aegon. Like, yeah, maybe Alicent will start to just lose loyalty to her side as the consequences of her shitty offspring get worse and worse. I wonder if Alicent will nope out at some point. I wonder what impact it'll have psychologically. I wonder if Alicent will tell Aegon, like, oh, hey, by the way, Aegon, just so you know, turns out your father never loved you and never wanted you to be king. I mean, Otto told that to Aegon previous episode, and it kind of broke him a bit, I think. But yeah, I think it shakes Alicent too. Jarek says, is it correct that the barmaid is the same one that Aegon assaulted in season 1? Yes. So this woman who's working at this bar is the same person who Aegon raped in season 1. Her name is Diana. Thank you, Matt, who says, do you think the spy missions are getting too abundant? Twice into King's Landing, once into Dragonstone. Does no one have guards? Yeah, I agree that the security situation in both King's Landing and Dragonstone leaves a bit to be desired. I mean, in fairness, Kingsguard are defecting and dying left and right, and the people in charge of the government are not very responsible now that Otto is gone. So yeah, it is a bit ridiculous, but I mean, that's sort of the phase of the war that we're in at the moment. The book talks about that, how it starts as a war of quills and ravens, and then it's a war of daggers and secrets and assassinations, and then it starts getting a bit more fiery and bloody. So I think that the war will continue to evolve as things go on. Thank you, Vil, who says that Rhaena told Baelor not to engage, but Baelor chased down Kristen. Was she trying to intimidate, or would she light them up if she could? Yeah, I agree. I mean, Baelor says in the episode that, like, oh, I sort of obeyed you. I mean, I didn't stay high, but I didn't kill anyone. But I think that's a good question. Like, what would Baelor have done if she actually caught up to Kristen? Would she have killed Kristen and Gwaine and those men? Maybe. Would she have captured them? Would she have scooped up Kristen in Moondancer's claws and flown off and dropped him in the Blackwater Bay? Maybe. I don't know. Just David says, why you publish review and episode late? The videos take time and work to make, and we do try and get them out sooner, but I'm more interested in making good videos than I'm interested in, like, rushing a video out as soon as possible. It would be better if the videos came out sooner, so we will try to finish the scripted, edited, explained videos quicker throughout this season, but my priority is making good videos, and I'm really glad that you guys are patient and watch them even when they come out a little later, so I'm grateful for that. Thank you, Arden, who says, can you explain where Ulf falls in the family tree? Yeah, well, we have a nice little Ulf tree here for you. If Ulf is correct about being the bastard son of Balon the Brave, then he is Viserys and Daemon's half-brother, and he is the uncle to Rhaenyra and Aegon. Thank you, Derek, who said, yo, was that a real wang being sucked? I can neither confirm nor deny the legitimacy or authenticity of the wang. Although I can say that in Game of Thrones, when we see Hodor's penis, that was in fact a prosthetic penis that Hodor had in Game of Thrones, which of course connects to the lore, because Osha suggests that Hodor must be part giant to have such a mastodonic member. So it all connects. Thank you, Just David. Thank you, Onion Peak, who says, kind of off topic, but do we think Otto will be given Hobart's role in the show? Yeah, well, I won't spoil any future events, but I am curious to see what happens with Otto. Alicent told Otto to go to Highgarden to rally the houses of the Reach, so we'll see how successful he is with that. Thank you to iScoob, who says, what are your thoughts on the logistics of Rhaenyra getting in and out? Yeah, it's risky, and they acknowledge that it's risky. It seems pretty likely that it would result in Rhaenyra being captured. I think she's lucky that she doesn't get captured. I mean, we haven't seen her escape. maybe she will get captured on her way out. I mean, it depends what Alicent wants to do, right? I mean, Alicent's Kingsguard are standing right outside the Sept. For all we know, Alicent is about to say, hey, fellas, let's capture the pretender queen in there. Let's cut off her head right now. That might happen. We don't know. But yeah, I agree. It's a little bit. It does strain your imagination a little bit. It does strain your credulity for Rhaenyra to get in and out of the enemy's stronghold like this. Though, you know, again, it's not like she got into the Red Keep. She only got into the Great Sept, which is, you know, there's not going to be as much security at church as there is at the seat of government. Marissa says, do you think now that Alicent knows that Viserys didn't mean Aegon, will she change how she views her son? Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question because, I mean, Alicent knows that Aegon is shit, right? I mean, Alicent has said that she just wants to use Aegon as a puppet king. She doesn't expect Aegon to actually make decisions. She hopes that Aegon will get sick of trying to rule and then she can just rule for him instead. So, I mean, Alicent has always been cynical about Aegon. I do think that, you know, Alicent believing that Viserys wanted Aegon to be king, like that was part of her justification in her head for everything that she's doing. And I think that, like, now Alicent no longer has that excuse. So Alicent really has to face the truth and be like, okay, I have to take responsibility for what's going on, and I have to take responsibility for my awful son being on the throne. Am I okay with this? What can I do about this? And it seems that the answer is she thinks she can't do anything. Alicent says it's too late, she's powerless now. The Aegon and Kristen are running away with the throne and she can't stop them waging the war. So, and maybe that's true. Really interesting to see how that'll go down. Thank you, Shackled Gamer, who says that Glidus and Alt-Swift X, woe upon his name, joked about Alicent and Rhaenyra meeting and realizing this was all a horrible mistake. I think Glidus and Alt-Swift X may have speculated that wouldn't it be funny if Alicent and Rhaenyra discussed Alicent's misinterpretation of Viserys' words and then realized, oh, oopsie daisy, it was all a misunderstanding. But unfortunately, it's happened. The war's started. Thousands have died at the Battle of the Burning Mill already, and you cannot undo the misunderstanding. And yes, Birdcatcher, that was Diana the Handmaid. Thank you, LaRock Your Socks Off 420, who says, do you think it's clear which side is in the wrong now? Rhaenyra seemed for a moment that she would bend the knee to Aegon if Jaehaerys' words were true, while Alicent rejected the truth in favor of circumstance. I'm not so sure if Rhaenyra would have surrendered to Aegon. I mean, it's been established pretty clearly that Rhaenyra and her family are a threat to Aegon just by being alive. Like Otto was saying, like, we have to kill Rhaenyra. Even if she surrenders, we can't let her live because her offspring could try to rebel against us and claim the throne generations from now. And Rhaenyra knows that. So I don't think, like, Rhaenyra would not be very willing to surrender. But I agree that, like, this ending scene, it does seem to put Rhaenyra more in the right than Alicent. Because Rhaenyra risked her life to come to Alicent and say, hey, let's prevent the war. And Alicent says, no, I'm leaving. Which, you know, partly that's an emotional reaction to Rhaenyra, you know, Rhaenyra's lies and Rhaenyra's son cutting the eye out of Herb's son. And, you know, there's a lot of bad blood here. And Alicent is shaken by the discovery that she misunderstood Viserys' words. But yeah, I agree. Like, I think that in this scene, Rhaenyra has the moral high ground. Because Rhaenyra is trying to make peace and Alicent is not engaging. I think that does put Rhaenyra on the moral high ground in this particular situation. But again, you know, Rhaenyra has done a lot of bad as well. If Rhaenyra hadn't had bastard children with Harwin, her position would have been a lot stronger and the realm would have been a lot more stable. Thank you, Isaac B, who says, Helena has disconnected emotions, similar to how Bran was after he became the Three-Eyed Raven. Yeah, that was one of the interesting choices that the Game of Thrones show made, is that after Bran Stark downloaded the consciousness of the Three-Eyed Raven, he sort of became a robot who didn't express emotions anymore, which is a strange choice, and I don't think that's where it's going in the books. In the books, Bran is still very much expressing emotion, and I tend to think that he will continue to express emotion. But I don't know. I mean, you know, the books have not been finished yet, so I don't know. There is something very weird about the ending of this show being this sort of like totally unknown, mysterious, unemotional dude being in control of everything, and we don't really know what he stands for or what he represents or what he believes or what he knows. That was an interesting choice for the ending of the most popular TV show in the world. But yeah, I think you're right. There is an interesting parallel with Helena, who is also someone who has dreams of the future and knows things, but also seems a bit disconnected from humanity. She's sort of on a different frequency. I think there definitely is a concept here about how having power disconnects you from humanity, and having knowledge and memory and time, it sort of unsticks you from normal relationships. The more transcendent you become, the less yourself and the less human you are. It's harder to relate to other people when you are experiencing time and space differently than they are. So I think that is part of what's going on with Helena and with Bran. Thank you, Blue Stasis, who says, I think it was super interesting that Alicent seemingly has a moment where she realizes that Viserys was referring to Aegon the Conqueror, but then she doubles down. Yeah, I mean, maybe that was like a knee-jerk reaction, was like denial. Like, this is such a huge truth bomb that Rhaenyra is dropping that kind of makes Alicent look like an idiot. So it's understandable that she reacts with denial at first. But I think, as we said, it's going to be really interesting to see how she processes this as time goes on. Like, maybe with time, Alicent will go, oh, yeah, nah, Rhaenyra was right, and maybe we need to stop naming our kids Aegon, and maybe I need to tell my son Aegon about this, and maybe we need to change things. I think it's really important how Alicent reacts to this, because Rhaenyra's offering an olive branch. How's Alicent going to respond? Thank you, Ingmar, who says Euron is the hot topic pirate. We have an Alt-Shift-X video all about Euron Greyjoy in the books, who is one of the scariest, most mysterious and spooky characters in the whole story. Thank you, Esteriol, who says, what has Kristen done to his hair? Yeah, I think that Kristen has made a decision to cut his hair when he's going to war. And he doesn't look as hot with shorter hair, sadly. Meanwhile, Jacaerys has grown out his hair. Jace has longer hair, and he looks better. So I think the moral of the story is that everyone should grow their hair long and sexy. Estariel says that maybe centuries of war in the Dornish marches allowed some forbidden love stories to happen. Yeah, so it's interesting that, Kristen's Dornish, but he served the Dondarians in the Stormlands, who fought against the Dornish for a long time on the borderlands, the Dornish marches. Yeah, I wonder what kind of forbidden romances might have happened. Montagues and Capulets, Targaryens and Starks, houses from opposing sides with star-crossed lovers betwixt them. Perhaps. Thank you, Mana Ash, who says, some of us are Team Black, some of us are Teak Green, but all of us are Team Helena. I like how even Rhaenyra is Team Helena. Like, Rhaenyra recently said that, oh my god, they killed Jaehaerys, that they killed Helena's baby boy. Helena doesn't deserve that. Why would anyone do that to poor innocent Helena? Like, we haven't seen a lot of interactions between Rhaenyra and Helena, but Rhaenyra seems very aware that Helena is a beautiful person who doesn't deserve any of the horror that's happening to her. So it's nice to see that from Rhaenyra. Thank you, Colorado, who says, I'm curious that if all the rats we've seen throughout the season, as well as the death of the rat catchers, might be forewarning a plague. Yeah, well, I mean, as we said in the recent video, in the books, Otto bought 100 cats to replace the rat catchers. I'm not joking. Cat purchases are an important part of the law. And yeah, you would think that killing all the rat catchers may lead to an increase in rats. And I wonder if Larys is almost symbolically one of those rats. In behind-the-scenes footage, we saw Helena did drawings of a rat king. And so without the rat catchers, I wonder if the rat king shall thrive. Thank you, Haynes Source. Thank you, Nolan, who says, I think it's kind of BS no one has called Aemond a kinslayer yet. But the Greens use that as a political point against the Blacks. I think that is a fantastic point, Nolan. Because, yeah, in the previous episode, the Greens were saying, hey, Rhaenyra is an evil monster because she killed her nephew Jaehaerys. She's a kinslayer, and kinslaying is the most evil thing that you can do in this world, or one of. Whereas Aemond killed his nephew, Luke. His dragon Vhagar ate Luke last season, and that's also kinslaying. And so you would think that Aemond would also be reviled as a kinslayer. I think that's a good point. I think that we haven't seen enough conversation about the death of Luke and Aemond's killing of Luke, because that should be a really big deal, and that should affect how people see Aemond. And we haven't really seen much of that on screen. Like, Aemond mentioned that he, like, regrets killing Luke, and Alicent has been angry at Aemond for killing Luke. So it seems as though Aemond claimed that he deliberately killed Luke when, like, he actually accidentally did it. Vhagar disobeyed him. I think I agree that there's more to unpack there. And they just sort of haven't fully unpacked the fallout and the consequences of Luke's death yet, so I agree. Thank you, Mother Nix, who says, I think Helena was saying I forgive you about the fact that Helena wasn't protected by guards, blaming Alicent for that. Yeah, I agree that that's part of what Helena forgives Alicent for. Though I think that it also applies more broadly to Alicent making Helena queen and marrying Helena to Aegon and all that other stuff. Nelly says Aegon's being manipulated for the worse. Yeah, Larys is absolutely manipulating Aegon. Larys, I think, gave Aegon the idea of firing Otto, and I think that Larys seems to be continuing to puppeteer Aegon to what ends we don't yet know. Thank you, Peckish, who says, I'm enjoying the mirrored goodbye Harwin had with his boys and Rhaenyra had with hers. Yeah, that's a good point. There was that scene last season where Harwin said goodbye to his bastard sons, Jace and Luke and Joffrey, and it was a wonderful, heartbreaking scene. And, you know, Harwin said, I promise I will see you boys again. I will return. But he didn't. He broke the promise because he died. And so I guess Rhaenyra must be thinking the same thing. Rhaenyra is saying goodbye to her sons, little Aegon and little Viserys. And she can't know if she'll ever see them again, which is really tragic and really sad. Thank you, Rims17, who says, thank you for educating us, Alt. Your knowledge and analytics have been feeding me for years, and you brighten my Sundays. One love always. Ah, thank you so much, Rims. Thank you, David, and thank you, Michael Dean. I think we'd better wrap up this live stream about now. It's been 3 hours, and we've got an Alt-Shift-X video to make. I'm sorry that I couldn't respond to all of the super chats. I've done my best, but I thank you for all the kind donations. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe. You can buy Alt-Shift-X merchandise if you'd like. There's a link in the description if you'd like to buy an Alt-Shift-X t-shirt or a pin. You can buy that if you'd like. But yeah, no, just thank you. Thank you for watching and supporting. This was fun. See you next week, 10 p.m. Eastern Time Sundays. We'll be there. See you there. Cheers. And thank you to Schubert Reads for moderating the live chat. You can check out Schubert's YouTube channel by clicking his name, Schubert Reads.